Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Noah Briggs, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in late October of last year, deep in the isolated stretches of the Toyabe National Forest in Nevada. I'm finally putting it into words because I need someone, anyone, to know what went on out there. Even if it sounds insane, even if it makes no sense, I have to share it before my memory disintegrates even more. I'm a freelance photographer, trying to build a name through nature documentaries and online survival vlogs. My friend Bennett joined me on this trip to record ambient sound. He's a freelance sound engineer, always on the hunt for creepy soundscapes he can sell or use in horror-themed podcasts. We had the perfect plan. Drive out into the quiet wilderness, park near an old trailhead, and backpack deep enough that neither phone nor modern convenience would disturb us. The idea was to give our online audience a taste of authentic, off-grid living. And I admit, I wanted the kind of views that come with real danger. We arrived at the edge of the Toyabe National Forest after a long, uneventful drive from Reno. We'd chosen a remote spot close to the Arc Dome wilderness area, where the land rose in a tapestry of rocky peaks and pines. Locals warned us about poor cell service and unpredictable weather. That didn't bother us, we wanted it. Our plan was to spend a week out there, living off freeze-dried rations, hunting for interesting footage, and capturing the essence of a spooky forest. Halloween season was around the corner, and I had a gut feeling a well-filmed series of short videos would get people's attention. I had no idea just how right I was, just for all the wrong reasons. We parked my old SUV on a dirt road near a makeshift campsite. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn dryness that makes your nose itch. Thor, my black German shepherd, jumped out first. He'd been restless the whole ride, and I figured he just needed to stretch his legs. But the moment his paws hit the ground, he froze. Ears pricked up, tail rigid. He let out a low growl. "What's your problem?" I asked, patting his flank. Thor rarely growled without reason. I glanced around. The pine trees loomed tall, swaying in the afternoon breeze. A few yards away, Bennett was unloading gear. He wore these huge studio headphones around his neck, a portable recorder strapped to his belt. He looked at Thor, then me, and gave a shrug. "Guy's got the creeps," Bennett said. "He'll relax once we find a good spot to settle." Maybe, I thought. But in the back of my mind, alarm bells clanged a little. Thor was well-trained, protective, but not typically jumpy. I let it go, though, because the sun was dipping behind the ridges and we needed to set up camp. We hiked in for about 2 hours, finding a small clearing near a creek. The water wasn't more than a trickle in places, but enough for washing and hopefully cooking. The site looked pristine. Thick pine cover, minimal underbrush, and rocky outcroppings that gave it an otherworldly vibe. Perfect for the spooky angle we wanted. I set up my camera on a tripod. Bennett tested his audio recorder, pacing around the perimeter of our soon-to-be campsite. Thor sniffed at the base of a tall pine, nose low, occasionally whining in the back of his throat. Every time he looked deeper into the forest, his ears went flat. "What's going on, bud?" I asked, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. "Feeling uneasy, huh?" He looked up at me with wide, dark eyes. Usually, that was enough to reassure him, but not this time. Bennett approached, waving me over. "You should hear this," he said, pressing a spare set of headphones against my ear. At first, I heard the typical forest ambiance. Wind in the branches, a few insects, maybe a bird call. Then, behind that, was a faint but distinct pattern, a soft rhythmic scraping. Could be a branch on bark, I said. Bennett's brow furrowed. Could be. But I don't see anything around here that's scraping. The wind's not that strong. We both stared at the tree line, the shadows between trunks thickening as the day wore on. I shrugged it off, attributing it to natural forest sounds. Something about the hush of these woods felt different, though. I exhaled, forced a grin. Creepy, right? Great for your horror library. He agreed, but neither of us looked entirely comfortable. We set up camp quickly, wanting to beat nightfall. I started a small fire using the dry tinder I'd packed. The flames caught quickly enough, crackling to life. I took comfort in the warmth. Bennett announced he'd record some more ambient sounds before darkness completely took hold, so he wandered off a short distance, still within sight, for that perfect, lonely wind track. The first sign of trouble came early that evening. I was filming an introductory segment for my vlog, describing the location and plan, trying to hype up the audience who would watch this later. Thor was right by my side, scanning the trees. Suddenly, a tremor seemed to roll through the ground beneath my feet. The camera jostled on the tripod. Birds scattered overhead. Quake? I mumbled aloud. There were fault lines in Nevada, but it seemed too mild to call it a proper earthquake. Just a brief shudder, gone as quickly as it started. I heard a snap from the woods. Bennett? I whirled around, not seeing him. Then the sound repeated, like a branch cracking. My stomach roiled. I lowered the camera and walked to the edge of the clearing. "Bennett?" I called. No reply. I repeated myself, voice echoing. At last, I caught sight of him. He seemed to be returning from behind a cluster of pines, headphones askew. He raised a hand in a half wave. "All good?" I asked when he got closer. "Yeah," he said, though his eyes flicked around, uncertain. "Just picking up some weird static. No big deal." I didn't push it. We had no reason to panic, yet. I decided we should get an early night so we could do the real exploration in daylight. The forest felt chilly already. I woke in the middle of the night to Thor barking. Not the playful bark, but the deep-throated, savage kind that said, "Something is here. Now." I fumbled out of my sleeping bag. My watch read 2:13 a.m. The campfire was dim, mostly embers. Bennett was also awake, rummaging for his flashlight. "What's going on?" he whispered, shining the beam outside the tent. I ducked out first, scanning the tree line. Thor stood rigid about 20 feet away, fur bristling, barking at something in the dark. The wind had died. The night was unnervingly still. A half moon cast enough light to make the pines ripple with shadows. I whistled to get Thor's attention, trying to keep my voice low. "Thor, come," I said. But he didn't. He kept barking. Bennett's flashlight swept across the clearing, momentarily illuminating the forest edge. I caught a glimpse of two red glints, like reflective eyes, shining at about chest height behind a trunk. They vanished as quickly as I registered them. "What the hell was that?" Bennett hissed. I had no idea. My first rational guess was a deer or maybe a mountain lion. Their eyes sometimes reflect weirdly in a beam, but the color, the intensity, they struck me as unnaturally bright, like embers. Thor's bark escalated. He took a few steps forward. I finally coaxed him back. He retreated to my side, still growling. We scanned the area with flashlights for a while, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of an animal. Eventually, we tried to settle down again, though it took me a couple of hours to get back to sleep, and Thor slept restlessly at the tent flap. The next morning, we planned a hike to check out the ridges and film some scenic shots. The weird tension from the night lingered, but I focused on the day's objective. Our phones were down to half battery, which wasn't surprising since coverage was nil and they constantly searched for signal. I decided to keep them off for the most part. Around mid-morning, Bennett tried to light the campfire for boiling water. The flame kept flickering out, as if invisible fingers pinched it. After 10 minutes of frustration, I gave it a shot. It finally roared to life, but the color was off. A strange pinkish hue mixed in with the usual orange. It only lasted a few seconds, but it made my heart skip. We brewed coffee, ignoring the unsettling flame color. We could chalk that up to minerals in the twigs, or maybe something in the pine needles. That's what I told myself anyway. Thor's hackles rose every time we stepped away from camp. I tried to film him, but he'd snap at me or bark at the forest. "He's never done this," I whispered to Bennett, as we started along a faint trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. "He's not usually so jumpy." Bennett was quiet for once. Usually he'd be joking or rambling about audio. Instead, he walked with his headphones on, recorder running. I heard snippets of static from the device. Every so often, he'd pause, tilt his head and say, "Are you hearing that?" But when I listened, it was only the hush of the pines. The trail twisted. The trees felt closer. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways, or maybe it was just the thick canopy messing with the sunlight. As midday approached, we realized the route was leading us uphill faster than we expected. I checked my phone's GPS to see exactly how far we'd gone. The arrow spun for a moment, then placed us somewhere we weren't, as if the phone was losing its mind. "Guess the signal's messing up," I muttered, shutting it off. We eventually found a vantage point, a rocky outcrop looking down into a valley of pines. The forest spread out in a tapestry of deep green, ringed by distant gray peaks. It should have been gorgeous. Instead, it felt lifeless, not a single bird flitting around. Just the hush. We filmed about an hour of footage, but I noticed Bennett wasn't recording. He was fiddling with the audio device, frowning. He offered me an earbud at one point, and in the faint static I thought I heard a voice whisper, "Noah." I jerked back, heart pounding. What was that? Bennett shrugged stiffly. "Dunno. Might be radio waves bouncing. The device is glitching." He looked spooked. We decided to head back. I started to get the sense we shouldn't be out there after dusk. The day wore on. We returned to camp. Something was off. The supply bag we'd hung from a branch to keep away from animals was no longer there. At first, I assumed it fell, but when we searched the ground, we found no sign of it. We combed the perimeter for footprints or drag marks. Nothing. We had freeze-dried rations in our backpacks still, so we weren't entirely doomed, but that missing bag contained extra water filters and half our food. Furious, I muttered about raccoons or bears, even though a neat disappearance was uncharacteristic of a wild animal. Typically, you'd find scraps or the torn bag. Bennett was sullenly quiet. We tried to call for help or at least check in with someone, but the phone batteries drained from half to zero in minutes. "That's not normal," I said, exasperated. Even turning them on for a moment killed them. We tested a small battery bank we'd brought, unresponsive. At dusk, we got the fire going again. The flames flickered weirdly, but stayed lit. I tried to do a quick piece to camera. "It's day 2 out here," I said, my voice sounding unsteady on playback. "We've lost some supplies. Cell batteries are dead. GPS is glitchy. We'll keep going. Nothing we can't handle, right?" I forced a chuckle. It felt hollow, especially since Thor kept pacing the perimeter, growling into the darkness. Bennett had slipped away to gather extra firewood. I didn't think twice about it until an hour passed and he hadn't returned. I called out for him, shining my flashlight into the black gaps between tree trunks. The forest swallowed my voice. Another half hour passed. Fear settled in my gut. I knew I should go looking for him, but it was pitch black. Even with a decent flashlight, it would be easy to get turned around. "Damn it, Bennett," I mumbled. "Don't do this." Thor was at my side, ears perked. We ventured a little ways from the camp, calling for Bennett. No answer. I debated pushing further, but a prickle along my skin told me not to. The wind had picked up, carrying what sounded like faint laughter. Or maybe it was just the trees. My breath turned shallow. I retreated to camp, deciding to wait for first light. If I wandered too far, we might both be lost. I tried to keep the campfire blazing, hoping Bennett would see it as a beacon. But the flames kept dwindling, struggling for oxygen that seemed absent. After midnight, Thor sprang to attention. His ears shot forward, his body tense. I stood, raising my flashlight. Bennett walked into the clearing. My relief was instant, though short-lived. He didn't speak. He moved slowly, awkwardly, as if he were a puppet on strings. His flashlight dangled from his fingers off. He reached the edge of the firelight and paused there, face partially in shadow. I was about to bombard him with questions when I noticed his posture. His head was tilted. His eyes shined too bright in the dark, and he wore a grin. Not a normal grin, too wide, stretching the corners of his mouth. "Where have you been?" I finally demanded. He chuckled softly. "Old Hunter's Trail," he said, voice emotionless. "Found something interesting." I didn't see any firewood in his arms, didn't see any sign of an injury or a scuffle. "Are you all right? You were gone forever." He just kept smiling. "All right, yeah." Thor approached him, hackles up, sniffing his pant leg. Then Thor whimpered and backed away. That's when I realized Bennett's boots were caked with something dark. Sap? Mud? Or something else. It didn't smell like normal forest grime. It had a bitter metallic tang. I forced calm. Let's get you warmed up," I said, directing him toward the fire. He stared at it with a vague interest as if he'd never seen a flame before. Then, with an exaggerated care, he eased himself onto a log. My flashlight caught a flicker of red in his eyes. I stepped back, unsettled. "Bennett?" He turned to me and frowned slightly, as if remembering who I was. "We'll be heading out tomorrow," he said without intonation. "We don't need to be here." His voice was off. The pitch hovered a half step lower than normal. I tried to push away the dread clawing up my spine. "We can't leave without our supplies and a plan. Wait until morning at least." He gave a single nod, went back to staring at the fire. I wanted to pepper him with questions. Where he'd been, why the weird behavior, but I couldn't find the courage to break the silence. Something primal in me said, "Don't provoke him." Eventually, he lay down by the fire. I crept into the tent with Thor, half expecting to hear him move around in the night, but everything stayed still. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the first thing I noticed was the lack of warmth. I rolled out of the sleeping bag feeling stiff. The fire was completely out. Ashes. Usually we banked it to keep embers smoldering, but it was ice cold. Bennett was gone again. The camera on its tripod, which I'd carefully placed under the tarp to protect from dew, had vanished. In a panic, I scoured the campsite. Our remaining supply bag was open, with the contents half rotted as if aged for months. The bread we had brought along looked moldy and black, even though we'd had it just the day before. "What the?" I mumbled, picking up a plastic container of peanut butter that looked rancid. Thor whined behind me. I clutched the container, struggling to keep my composure. Time felt wrong. How could food go bad overnight? I set it aside and tried to find some semblance of normalcy, gathering water from the creek. That was when I realized it was more a trickle of sludge, or so it seemed. The water was tinted brown, thick and unappetizing. I stood there, heart pounding, as the forest pressed in. The day felt gloomier than it should have. The sun was up, but the light was weak, diffuse. Bennett strolled into camp a few minutes later, cradling my missing camera. He set it down, ignoring me, and rummaged in the tattered supply bag. I forced myself to speak. "Where'd you go?" He didn't look up. "Out," he said. I clenched my fists. "You took my camera. Why?" He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. His knuckles were dirty, crusted with the same blackish residue. "Wanted to get some shots," he muttered. "She told me you'd want them." My stomach lurched. "She? Bennett? Who's she?" He gave me that too wide grin again, but said nothing, turning to stare at the lumps of rotted food. I decided we needed to leave. GPS or not, I had enough experience to navigate back to the SUV if I followed the creek. I told Bennett my plan. He just shrugged. Then he started humming, off-key, an eerie lullaby, over and over. It was the creepiest thing I've ever heard. I packed my gear and called Thor. He was reluctant to leave me, but I saw him keep his distance from Bennett, circling behind me whenever we moved. We set off through the woods. I had no watch. My phone was dead. But from the sun's position, I guessed it was around 9 o'clock or 10 a.m. as we started. The creek flowed lightly to my right, so as long as I kept it in sight and continued downhill, I'd eventually reach the SUV. That was my logic. For the first hour or two, we made decent progress. The forest was quiet in a way that grated on my nerves. No birds, no insects. Even stepping on twigs didn't make them snap as loudly as they should. The echoes felt muffled. Meanwhile, Bennett trudged behind me, never complaining, never speaking except for occasional tuneless humming. It was unnerving. Thor seemed more comfortable the further we got from the campsite. My hope rose a bit. Then, abruptly, we came upon a clearing. At first, I thought it was a different place. But as soon as I stepped out from behind the trees, I recognized it. Our original campsite. The fire pit, the pile of ashes. We had walked in a circle even though I'd followed the creek. "That can't be right," I muttered, heart racing. I looked at the creek. It made no sense. The water should be continuing downhill, but it looped around, rejoining at an angle that defied geometry. What the hell? Bennett just kept humming, that same mindless tune. I grabbed him by the shoulders. "Stop that. We're going the wrong way, but it shouldn't be possible. Did you see any forks in the creek? Did you notice anything?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face. Then he said, "The forest likes you. It wants you to stay. She told me we can't leave yet." "Who told you?" I demanded. My voice cracked. He blinked slowly, glancing at Thor and then at me. "Morik," he said softly. He said the name like a reverent prayer or an invocation. The hair on my neck stood up. I wanted to scream at him, but I just let go, staggering back. He wore that maddening grin again. There was something behind his eyes that wasn't him anymore. I decided to try a different route. Instead of hugging the creek, I aimed for a southwestern direction based on the position of the sun. As we marched, the forest got denser. The pines pressed in with the needle-carpeted floors that made each step oddly silent. The day's light seemed to wane too quickly, as if someone had twisted the sun's dial forward. By what I thought was mid-afternoon, the sky had the hue of evening. Shadows grew, elongated. A primal panic took hold. I had to find a way out before night truly fell. Suddenly, Thor tensed and barked. He sprinted ahead, disappearing over a slight rise. I followed, calling his name, cursing my bad leg for slowing me down. Bennett lagged behind. When I crested the rise, I nearly tripped over Thor, who had stopped short, growling at something up in the branches. I looked up. My heart crashed against my ribs. Thor's body hung from the tree, skinned and strung up by the leash. Its eyes were missing. My vision doubled. My mind couldn't process it. Thor was right next to me. I looked down at the live Thor, who was barking frantically at the horror above us. Then my eyes flicked upward again at a second Thor, or something that used to be him. I stared between them, confusion spiking into terror. I realized the dead dog in the tree wasn't identical. The fur color was correct, the approximate shape, but the face had a different muzzle structure. It was as if something had tried to replicate Thor's body and gotten it slightly wrong. Still, it was a black German shepherd, skinned from the skull down, leash coiled around the exposed muscle of the neck. Blood dripped from the branches, congealing in black lumps on the ground. I tasted bile in my throat, stumbling backward. Bennett arrived behind us, panting. He let out a giddy laugh at the sight. "Oh," he said. "Guess she doesn't need that one." I spun on him, mind reeling. "What the hell is going on? Did you do this?" He gave a wide shrug, smirking. "I'm just following instructions." Rage flared, blotting out logic. I lunged at him, fists swinging. I caught him in the chest, knocking him to the ground. He coughed, but instead of lashing out, he laughed. "She's so close now," he rasped. His eyes were changing color in front of me, going from hazel to black. "She's been waiting for you." I grabbed his collar and shook him. "What did you do, you psycho?" My words came out in a trembling sob. "How? Why?" He opened his mouth. Thin black liquid dribbled from the corners. "She needed a sacrifice," he whispered. "Couldn't get you yet, so she made do." I let go of him, stumbling away. My entire body shook. I didn't want to believe it. The overhead dog corpse, the black fluid, the insane grin. It was all too hideous. My eyes darted to the live Thor. He was very much alive and trembling, his ears flattened. Part of me realized that the thing in the tree might not literally be my dog. Maybe it was a twisted trick, a doppelganger. The alternative, that my dog was both dead and alive, was unthinkable. I had to get away from that tree, from Bennett, from everything. I turned, not caring about direction anymore, and ran, crying out for Thor to follow. I heard him bounding behind me. Bennett's laughter echoed as I fled. I tore through the forest, ignoring branches that clawed my arms, ignoring the trembling in my legs. Thor kept pace, occasionally barking as if to keep me from losing my mind. At some point, I tripped on a root and crashed hard. Pain shot up my left knee. I bit down on a scream, scrabbling in the needle-covered ground. When I looked up, a tall figure was leaning over me. It was impossibly thin, with skin that looked like bark grown over bone. Its arms ended in claw-like fingers. The face was elongated, and two red eyes blazed in hollow sockets. The stench it gave off was like rotting vegetation and old blood. My mind went blank with terror. My throat locked. All I could do was stare as it hissed, jaws parting too far, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. My flashlight wavered across it, and for a fraction of a second I saw the deeper lines in its bark, as if 1,000 years of cursed growth had fused with a once human body. It opened its mouth wider and croaked my name, Noah. I somehow forced myself to move, crawling backward. The figure let out a rattling laugh, the sound reminiscent of dead leaves. Then it turned and vanished into the gloom. So swiftly I questioned if I'd even seen it, but I smelled it. That decaying odor burned into my memory. Thor was whimpering behind me. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing in my knee, and stumbled forward. There was no logic to my running. I just needed to be anywhere but there. I lost track of time, plunging through the dark pines. At some point, everything grew unnaturally silent again. My watch was useless. The display flickered and died. The day's light was gone, replaced by a weird twilight that made no sense. By normal standards, it should have been late afternoon, but it felt like midnight. Or maybe it was midnight. I couldn't tell. Eventually, I saw a flicker of light in the distance. My heart soared, thinking maybe I'd found a ranger cabin. Sure enough, as I stumbled closer, I spotted the shape of a small wooden structure perched near a cluster of boulders. A single lantern glowed in the window. Thor and I approached cautiously, half expecting the building to vanish like everything else. But it stayed. I pounded on the door, no response. It was locked. I tried the windows, also locked. My knee ached fiercely, and I needed shelter. With a rock from outside, I smashed a window pane, reaching inside to unlock it. Clambering in, I felt a wave of relief at being in four walls. Thor hopped through, sniffing frantically. The place smelled of dust, mold, and old leather. It was a single-room cabin, shelves lined with tattered ranger manuals, an old wooden table, and a cot with a threadbare blanket. A battered lantern flickered on the table, despite no visible fuel or flame. I slumped onto the cot, letting the pain sink in. My gaze traveled the walls, noticing pinned photos. Faded black and white pictures of people in old hiking gear. Some were from the 1930s or 40s, maybe. A few more modern ones, Polaroids. Each was labeled with a date. My heart froze when I realized these were missing persons. Pictures presumably left here by search and rescue rangers. Dozens of them, pinned in a neat grid. One photo in the corner caught my eye. It showed a man about my age, with a black German shepherd by his side. The date in the corner read 1951, and the man was a dead ringer for me. Same facial structure, same hair, same posture. The dog looked exactly like Thor, wearing a collar identical to the one I'd bought at a pet store in Reno. I stared, goosebumps crawling across my flesh. It was impossible. The dog in the photo was alive, not skinned or half something else. Dizziness washed over me. I tore the photo from the wall, flipping it over. On the back, it read in neat handwriting, "No sign of William D. or dog. Believed missing." I whispered to Thor, my voice quivering. This doesn't make sense. That can't be me. This is insane. The dog just rested his muzzle on my leg, eyes full of concern. A noise outside made me jolt. Heavy footsteps scraping the porch. I grabbed the nearest object for protection, a rusted hatchet leaning in a corner. The doorknob rattled. My heart hammered. I raised the hatchet, ready to swing if something came through. Then a deep voice rumbled, "Noah, let me in." It sounded exactly like Bennett. "No," I croaked, backing away. The doorknob stopped shaking. Then his voice again, "Fine, I'll break it down." I braced myself, pressing my back to the table. The cabin door shuddered under a tremendous impact, once, twice. On the third, it burst open, splinters flying. Thor barked, launching forward. I shouted, "Thor, no!" But he was defending me. Bennett stood there, though everything about him was distorted. He looked taller, or maybe stretched. His eyes were fully black. He didn't flinch as Thor lunged. Instead, he seized the dog by the scruff, flinging him aside with inhuman strength. Thor yelped, colliding with a chair. Rage overrode my terror. I swung the hatchet at Bennett. He caught my wrist mid-swing, unbelievably strong, and twisted until I dropped it. Then he pinned me against the wall. My vision swam, pain blazing in my shoulder. He leaned in close, his breath rancid like decaying leaves. "I told you," he whispered, in that voice that was half his, half something else. "She needs you. Morik isn't done." I couldn't breathe. Spots danced in my vision. He laughed, a wet, choking sound. His free hand reached up to trace a line on my cheek. Where his fingers touched, my skin felt cold like ice. Then he repeated, "She needs you." Suddenly, Thor latched onto Bennett's arm, snarling, claws scrabbling against the floor. Bennett screamed, a high, feral shriek, His hold on me loosened. I threw my weight to the side, desperate to break free. We toppled onto the floor, a tangle of limbs. I scrambled for the hatchet, found it near the table. Bennett was already up, swinging his fists. I had a split second to react, swinging the hatchet at his leg. The rusted blade bit into flesh. Black fluid spurted, hissing like acid on the wooden floor. Bennett howled, collapsing to one knee. My terror took over. I hacked again. He lifted an arm to block. My blade sank into it. Another ear-splitting screech from him. I caught a glimpse of bone, but it looked wooden, twisted fibers embedded in a swirl of flesh. He stared at me with those black eyes and spat, "You'll never leave." Then he shoved me backward. I stumbled, hitting my head on the table. My vision went fuzzy. Through the fog, I saw Bennett shamble out of the cabin, leaving a trail of that sizzling black fluid. Thor was barking, but not chasing. Bennett, or whatever was inside him, limped into the darkness. The adrenaline crash left me trembling. I wanted to cry, to collapse, but I forced myself up. Thor was panting, favoring one paw. I checked him for injuries, relief flooding me that he seemed mostly bruised. I turned my attention to the door. Bennett had battered it off its hinges. Outside, the darkness shifted, shapes moving in the trees. I half expected the red-eyed creature to appear, or for Bennett to come back. But no one did. Gritting my teeth, I dragged a heavy shelf in front of the broken door, barricading it as best I could. Then I snatched the lantern from the table, though I still couldn't figure out what powered it. It had no oil reservoir, no battery, yet it glowed. I didn't care to question it further. Light was light. I stared around the cabin, mind reeling. My calf was bleeding from a small cut, probably from the scuffle. Thor whined softly, wanting reassurance. We were trapped in this twisted forest, our supplies rotted or gone, my phone dead, and an evil presence, Morik, if Bennett's possessed rambling was correct, stalking us. At some point, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into a half-sleep on the cot, the hatchet clutched in my hand. But my dreams were nightmares. I saw the forest warping, time swirling, glimpses of that 1951 photograph in color, me pinned to a tree, my eyes hollowed out. In the dream, a female voice hissed, "You belong to me." I awoke in a panic. The lantern had gone out, leaving only gray dawn through the broken door. I had no idea how long I'd slept. My head throbbed. Thor was curled near my feet, and the floor was sticky with black stains from the fight. I tested my knee, painful but functional. Every muscle ached. My mind circled around one thought. I have to get out. This cabin offered no real protection if that thing or Bennett returned in force. Even if it was broad daylight, I couldn't trust the forest to behave by normal rules. Before leaving, I took stock of the shelves. The ranger manuals were decayed, pages stuck together. I found a dusty old first aid kit with some bandages and questionable antiseptic. I used them on the slash on my calf. Then I noticed a big steel lockbox under the cot. I pried it open with the hatchet, hoping for a flare gun or something. Inside, I found a single bullet, rusted beyond use, an old Polaroid camera broken to bits, and a tattered journal. The journal pages were mostly illegible with water damage, but near the back I could read, "Morik is the land. It claims who it wants. The forest warps time for it. The missing never truly leave." I shivered. So it had a name, Morik, and apparently it could twist time, manipulate space. I recalled the creek looping us back, the weird rotting supplies, the old photo of me from 1951. My sense of reality fractured further. I set the journal aside, pushing away the dread that threatened to paralyze me. I had to try to walk out. If the SUV was unreachable, maybe I could find a main road or a new campsite with people. If I died trying, at least I'd die fighting. The morning was cold. Sunlight filtered through high clouds, casting everything in a washed-out light. Thor limped a bit, but trotted dutifully at my heel. We wandered away from the cabin in what I guessed was north, though the sun's position still seemed off, like it was too high or too low, never matching my internal sense of time. As we walked, I noticed something. There were no shadows. The light was bright, but my body cast only a faint smudge. The trees, likewise, had watery outlines. The forest was dimmer than normal, but with no crisp lines. It was like we were somewhere half in a dream. We pressed on, ignoring the bizarre environment, forging a path through the underbrush. Hours, or what felt like hours, went by. I kept track of the changes in the sky, but it didn't shift normally. The day hovered in a sort of perpetual mid-morning haze. We reached a downward slope leading to a wide ravine. At the bottom, a dried-out creek bed that might connect to a larger route. My heart pounded with the hope that following it could lead me to a real exit. I clambered down the slope, Thor behind me, until we reached the creek bed. The instant my feet touched the rocky bottom, the forest came alive with a rustling hiss. I froze. Thor growled, looking around. The pines atop the ravine shifted, parted, and a shape descended. Morik. I saw it clearly this time in the pallid daylight. It had a vaguely human frame, but the limbs were too long, the torso too thin. Bark fused with pale, mottled flesh. Its face was a mask of rough wood, parted near the mouth to reveal needle teeth. Red eyes glowed from deep sockets. My stomach twisted. Slowly, the creature stepped to the edge of the slope, raising one gnarled arm. It beckoned me with a twisted claw, mouth opening in silent laughter. I felt a wave of cold dread as the wind roared in my ears. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun. Bennett was there, limping but upright. Black liquid oozed from his gashed arm and leg. He moved stiffly, like a puppet, his eyes still ebony. A horrendous grin distorted his features. He looked at Morik, then back at me, as though waiting for a signal. Trapped between them, I clutched my hatchet. Thor barked, cowering behind me. If there was a time for heroics, this was it, except they outnumbered me. And Morik exuded a presence that felt impossible to defeat. Morik slithered down the slope, each movement accompanied by the sound of scraping wood. I saw how old it was. Slabs of bark peeled away from black muscle. The stench was choking. My instincts screamed, "Fight, or you'll die here." Bennett moved first, stumbling forward to grab me. I swung the hatchet at his chest. It buried halfway in, but he didn't stop. He shoved me into the rocky ground, the force sending jolts of pain through my body. I lost grip on the hatchet as we rolled. My vision blurred with tears of frustration. He pinned me, baring his teeth. I felt him pressing down, hands at my throat. A gurgle escaped my lips. Thor lunged, latching onto Bennett's arm again, but Bennett scarcely reacted. His strength was unnatural. My lungs screamed for air. Desperate, I twisted, managed to wedge a knee between us. I kicked, pushing him off just enough to scramble free. Morik was closer now, watching with dark amusement. The creature let out a rattling hiss that seemed to vibrate in my skull. Bennett let out a roar, pouncing again. I grabbed a rock from the creek bed and slammed it into the side of his head. He reeled. I hit him a second time, feeling bone crack. The black fluid gushed, spattering me. It burned like acid on my arm, sizzling through my shirt. I screamed, stumbling back. That's when Morik sprang forward. I expected it to attack me, but it grabbed Bennett by the shoulder, ripping him away from me. For a moment, I thought it was saving me. Then I realized it was punishing Bennett. It tore at him, stripping away bark and flesh, leaving a gaping hole in his torso. Bennett howled, thrashing. The black fluid poured out, hissing. Morik let out a satisfied grunt, then fixed its red eyes on me. I saw raw malevolence in that gaze. I scrambled for the hatchet, found it half buried in the creek mud. My muscles shook. The creature advanced, each step filled with a crackling sound like bending timber. I could barely stand on my leg, but my survival instincts and a wave of hatred spurred me on. It had taken everything. My safety, my friend's mind, my dog's peace, maybe even my sanity. I screamed and charged. We collided. It was like hitting a tree trunk, but it moved with a fluid elasticity that belied its wooden appearance. It clawed my arm, raking 4 deep gouges in the flesh. I howled in pain, but managed to drive the hatchet into its torso. The bark-like skin resisted, but the blade sank a few inches, black-green fluid oozing. The stench overwhelmed me. Morik screeched, an ear-splitting, otherworldly wail that seemed to echo in multiple pitches. My mind reeled. I yanked out the hatchet and hacked again. It staggered, shrieking louder. An idea came: fire. Our attempt at the campsite had shown weird flames. Fire might do real damage, but I had no lighter, no chance to build a blaze. All I had was fury and the hatchet. Morik lashed out, carving a strip of flesh from my side. I gasped, nearly losing my grip. But I pressed on, slamming the hatchet into what resembled its neck. More black-green fluid spattered. My vision blurred from the rank odor. The creature's knees buckled. It flailed, but I twisted the blade, ignoring the wave of nauseating heat that washed over me. It released another high-pitched screech, thrashing so violently I was nearly thrown off my feet. The forest around us seemed to darken, as if in solidarity with Morik's pain. Then, abruptly, it crumpled to the ground. I stumbled back, chest heaving, hatchet raised in case it rose again. It lay there, seeping black fluid. The red glow in its eyes flickered like dying embers. Bennett's body was some yards away, motionless. The ravine was thick with the stench of death. Thor stood at the perimeter, trembling. I approached Morik slowly, heart hammering. It didn't stir. With shaking hands, I poured the remaining antiseptic from my first aid kit over its wounds, hoping the alcohol might burn or keep it from healing. I reached for my lighter out of habit, only to remember I'd lost it along with most supplies. All I could do was limp away, clinging to Thor. My side and arm bled. I was losing strength quickly, but I had to put distance between us and that monstrosity. What happened next is a blur. I remember stumbling through the trees, leaning on Thor for balance. The forest began to lighten, as if the sun had shot from dawn to noon in minutes. Then I saw a dirt road. The same dirt road, I realized, near where we'd parked the SUV. I dragged myself along it, praying for a miracle. After maybe half a mile, my SUV came into view. It was intact, dust-coated just as I left it. I almost sobbed in relief. Fumbling for the keys in my pockets, I reached the door. Thor whined, tail wagging faintly as we found refuge. The car door squealed open, but as I slumped in the driver's seat, exhaustion battered me. My vision swam. I managed to start the engine. The battery was low, the dashboard lights dim, but the engine caught. I drove as fast as the rough track allowed, bouncing over ruts. My main focus was to get somewhere with people. My head pounded, blood soaking my side, pain screaming in my every nerve. Thor lay on the passenger seat, head on my lap, as if sensing I needed comfort to stay conscious. Time blurred. Maybe an hour passed, maybe 5. Eventually, I saw a park ranger's truck. A uniformed ranger stood by the side of the narrow highway. I pulled over, tears streaming. The ranger jogged up, expression alarmed. "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide at the blood and scrapes on me. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick. my thoughts jumbled. Finally, I rasped, We got lost in the forest. My friend, my dog, that thing. Something attacked us." The ranger's brow furrowed. "Calm down," he said gently. "Folks don't come up here much anymore. Not since that incident back in '51. That date." My mind spun. Was that an actual reference to the photograph? My voice trailed off as he eyed Thor, who stared back, ears flattened. "We'll get you help," the ranger said. "But I've got to ask, who else is out there?" I swallowed. "My friend," I finally managed. "Bennett. He's gone." The ranger gave me an odd look, then gestured to his radio. "Let me call an ambulance for you. You look half dead." My relief was short-lived. Something in the ranger's eyes wasn't quite right. As he turned to speak into the radio, I realized I couldn't stop shaking. The black fluid from Bennett's wounds had splashed onto me. Some of it still stained my arm. I noticed my fingernails. They were turning dark, tinted with that bark-like pattern. My breath caught. A burning ache spread from my nails into my fingers, almost too faint to feel. But it was there, creeping. I stared at the ranger, who was busy with his radio, and then looked down at Thor. "Hang on," the ranger was saying. "We have an injured hiker out here." I touched my nails. A dull horror blooming in my chest as I felt the bark-like texture. It was growing, a living infection creeping beneath my skin. No matter where I was, back on the road, in the real world, miles from the cursed forest, I wasn't truly free. I shut my eyes, leaning my head against the seat, tears welling up. Thor let out a low whine, nestling against me. I stroked his neck, forcing myself not to scream. Or maybe I was screaming silently, inside. A part of me already sensed it. I would never truly leave. Morik would always have a piece of me. And if that piece ever finished its slow, creeping possession, God help anyone I'm near. My name is Owen Hale, and I am 33 years old. This happened in November 2025, and I have never told anyone the whole truth about what went on in Jarbidge Canyon until now. I guess I'm hoping that by finally getting it all down, I can at least convince myself it really happened, because sometimes I'd rather believe I'm crazy than accept what I saw. But I'm telling this exactly as I remember it. Believe me or don't, it's all I've got left. I moved out to Jarbidge in late summer, running from a life I'd left in complete disarray, a divorce, a job that had sucked the soul out of me, and a sense of shame and failure that I couldn't shake. At first, it was supposed to be a spiritual cleansing. I was sick of hearing traffic outside my bedroom window in Reno, or the clang of dishes in the apartment overhead. So I found a tiny, off-grid cabin through a friend of a friend. Dirt cheap, probably because it was in the middle of nowhere, 8 miles off the main dirt road, half the utilities in questionable shape. But I didn't care. That was exactly what I wanted. The nearest place with a semblance of civilization was the little township of Jarbidge, a ghost of a mining community that used to be a big draw for prospectors back in the early 1900s. There are fewer than 100 year-round residents today. They have a small store, a saloon, and a whole lot of empty space. The Jarbidge wilderness beyond that store is mountainous, forested, and remote, in a way few places in the lower 48 can match. Exactly what I was looking for. I settled into the cabin in August, excited to learn how to survive on my own. It was humbling work. I realized how naive I'd been when I tried to fix a generator with YouTube tutorials I'd saved offline. There was no real phone signal out there. Even my solar charger struggled to stay alive for more than a few hours. Sometimes the wind was so fierce it felt like it would blow the panels right off the roof. But I was determined. My plan was to write a book, some half-baked memoir or maybe a piece of fiction. just something to get my creative side back into gear. Mostly, I wanted to heal. I wasn't sure how, but I felt that if I was surrounded by trees, canyons, and quiet, I might finally breathe again. I'd been in the cabin about 2 months when my old friend Eli Barton decided to visit. Eli was 36 and had lived a more interesting life than me, having spent time in Alaska, Montana, and a few years in an off-grid commune. We'd met back in Reno through mutual acquaintances. He'd been the one to help haul some of my bigger furniture in his battered old pickup when I first came out here. He was practical, stoic, and seemed unshakable in his beliefs, chief of which was that anything spiritual or supernatural was nonsense. The only ghosts we got, he'd say, are the ones in our heads. He arrived in that same battered pickup one chilly morning. The leaves had gone golden in the aspens, and winter was threatening to set in soon. He brought me enough canned goods to last a couple months, a water filter, and some odds and ends for the cabin. We spent the day stacking firewood, cleaning the solar panels, and planning for the colder weather. At night, we sat outside under the stars, sipped whiskey, and tried to watch for shooting stars. It was the most at peace I'd felt in ages. On the second night, something woke me at 3 in the morning. I had been asleep on a creaky cot in the cabin's single bedroom, and I heard a distinct rhythmic knocking. It wasn't on the door, but somewhere out in the yard, like someone tapping on a tree trunk or the side of the house. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and realized my breath was visible in the cold air. The small wood stove had nearly gone out. I threw on a jacket and shuffled to the window. It was pitch black beyond it. Moonlight illuminated only the faintest shape of the yard. But that knocking repeated. A slow tap, tap, tap. I thought maybe it was a branch, or an animal. I heard a muffled voice then, a man's voice, though the words were unclear. My hair stood up on my arms. Why would anyone be out here at 3 in the morning, in the freezing cold? I went to wake Eli, who was sleeping on the couch. He stirred, grunted, and snapped on a flashlight. In a haze, we walked out onto the porch. Nobody stood there, but I heard the voice again. Distant, just at the edge of the yard where the aspen and spruce thickened. Eli flicked his light around. "Hey!" he shouted. "Who's there?" Nothing. We stepped off the porch. The beam of the flashlight sliced through the trees. Finally, we caught a glimpse of someone. Tall, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned coat, leaning against a tree trunk. The figure wore a hat that might have been a stovepipe style and had a bizarre silhouette, almost as if his legs bent backward. My mind played tricks on me in that moment, because I swore I saw hooves instead of shoes. Eli must have seen something too, because he stiffened. But before either of us could speak, the figure turned to us and said, "Sundown. That's the deadline, Owen." I can't describe the man's voice properly, oily, smooth, and yet somehow echoing inside my own head. I froze. He knew my name. Something about the way he said it felt like cold fingers on my spine. Eli yelled, "Who are you? How do you know him?" Then he marched forward, refusing to let fear stop him. The figure just melted into the shadows. By the time Eli's flashlight caught the trunk of that tree, it was gone, as if it had never been there. No footprints, no crackling of leaves, nothing. We spent an hour searching, though, with no results. Finally, we went back inside and loaded the stove with wood to bring the temperature up. The rest of the night I lay awake, listening for more sounds, more tapping. None came. In the morning, we tried to rationalize it. A trespasser, some local with a grudge. Maybe it was an illusion. But that didn't settle my mind. I kept replaying the words. Sundown. That's the deadline, Owen. Deadline for what? Eli said we should check the property lines, see if we spotted footprints. But the ground was a mess of pine needles and rock. No sign of anything. We decided to brush it off and focus on practical matters. like chopping firewood. We needed to gather more if the temperatures were going to drop this quickly. Eli set out around midday with an axe and a plan to find some fallen trees. I stayed behind to clean up and fix the solar battery wiring. I'd never done that alone before, but I managed. Afternoon came and went, and Eli didn't return. The sun hung low in the sky, and the shadows grew long. I tried not to be alarmed. Maybe he'd found a good spot, or had gone farther than expected. But when the last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the canyon wall, an uneasy panic filled my chest. Where the hell was he? He had a flashlight, but he should have been back. I tried calling out, but my voice echoed without reply. I was about to gather my gear and look for him when I heard a frantic pounding on the cabin door. I yanked it open, expecting Eli, but instead I saw a woman. Sophie Cutter. That's how she introduced herself, though it took a moment before I got the name out of her. She stood there, breathing hard, holding her arm awkwardly. She had a deep gash across her forearm that dripped blood onto the porch boards. "Please," she said, "let me in. I'm hurt." I'm not exactly the suspicious type, but given the events of the previous night, I felt an immediate surge of paranoia. Yet she looked terrified. Her clothing torn, her hair a tangled mess, as if she'd been running through the brush. I relented and ushered her inside. I got out the first aid kit and helped bandage her arm as best I could. When I asked what happened, she just stared at me for a few seconds before saying, "He's coming again." I thought she meant an attacker, a psychopath, but she wouldn't give details. She only repeated, "He's coming," and "I saw your friend in the woods," but her eyes darted everywhere, as if she was half certain someone else might be in the cabin with us. Finally, she calmed enough to say she'd been out hiking in the region. She wouldn't specify why, and was assaulted by someone with red eyes, who demanded she tell him her regrets. The more she tried to explain, the less it made sense, and she said, "He's got goat feet, man, I swear, I'm not hallucinating." That's when my stomach knotted into a tangle of dread. Did she see the same figure from last night? Night closed in, and Eli still didn't come back. I wanted to look for him, but Sophie insisted we stay in the cabin, that it wasn't safe out there. The rational side of me insisted that Eli might be hurt. The primal side told me not to go out in that darkness after what I'd witnessed. I gathered my courage around 8 in the evening. Sophie said she'd come with me, which surprised me, but I appreciated the help. We each had a flashlight, and I had a rifle the cabin's former owner left behind. We scoured the path leading uphill, calling Eli's name. No answer. At one point, we heard a snap of branches, whipped around, and shone our flashlights onto nothing but empty space. We found footprints that might have been his, and a few logs that had been freshly chopped, but no sign of him. Back at the cabin, exhausted and increasingly uneasy, we built up the fire in the wood stove and set out bedrolls. I let Sophie take the single cot in the bedroom, just to rest. In the living area, I tried to doze on the couch. I must have drifted off. A creaking sound roused me. The front door was cracked open. The swirl of wind and snow drifted inside. I jumped to my feet, rifle in hand, heart pounding. I turned on my flashlight, scanning the room. The door hadn't even been locked. That was my mistake, a sign of my naivete. I called Sophie's name, but she didn't respond. I went to the bedroom. The door was half shut. The bed was empty. Her sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside like she had quietly gotten up. Fear took root in me again. I couldn't see footprints on the floor, just the general scuff. But as I turned to leave, I nearly tripped over something. It was a dead bird, stiff and cold, placed carefully on the floor beside the bed. I froze in horror. Who the hell put that there? I rushed to the living area. intending to search outside, but I stopped short. Sophie was standing by the window, shivering. "He's out there," she said. "I can see him, a tall man in a black coat. He wants in." I was about to ask if she opened the door for him, but her eyes looked glassy, like she was in a trance. Instead, I closed and locked the door, pushing a heavy chest in front of it. We sat in silence for a while. That's when I noticed the time on my watch, a cheap digital. It read 2:12 a.m. The battery icon blinked as if low. I tried my phone, but it was dead. The solar charger had apparently drained. I had no way to confirm anything except the old analog clock above the kitchen sink, which read 4:20 a.m. That was weird. I assumed maybe I forgot to wind it or it was broken. We stayed up, mostly in silence, until dawn lit up the windows. I unblocked the door and stepped onto the porch, calling for Eli again. Sophie lingered behind me. I could see her breath in the cold morning air. Then, to my shock, we heard a rustling in the brush, and Eli stepped out. At first glance, I was relieved. He didn't appear injured, just dusty and cold, with an axe slung over his shoulder. But something about the way he moved made my scalp tingle. His gait was too smooth, like he was floating an inch above the ground. He wore a blank, too wide grin as he approached. "Morning, O," he said, using my old nickname, his voice a tad off-pitch. "I got your wood. Didn't expect the trip to take so long." For a moment, I wanted to rush to him, ask what happened, but something held me back. Sophie stood behind me, practically hiding. I noticed her trembling. Eli looked past me at her, locked eyes for an uncomfortable second, then turned back to me. "What's she doing here?" he asked. "She's not part of the plan." That phrasing, "the plan," sounded jarring. I didn't know what plan he meant. I asked him if he was lost. He didn't respond, just kept smiling in that vacant way. I told him I'd been worried, that we'd looked for him. He said, "I was never lost, just needed a little guidance from our friend." "Your friend?" I asked, eyebrows pinched. Eli shrugged, that strange smile not budging. "He's got many names." I caught Sophie's eyes. She mouthed, "Not your friend." That's when my confusion turned to dread. I invited Eli inside, though, because leaving him out there in the cold seemed even more dangerous if something had changed in him. I tried to keep my rifle hidden behind the door. Sophie sat in a corner, arms folded. We tried to figure out what was going on. Eli set the axe down, sat at the table, and stared at us while we fixed some coffee. It was unnerving how he tracked our every move. At one point, I noticed a dark stain on his pant leg that looked suspiciously like old blood, but I couldn't confirm. He drank the coffee in a single gulp, made a face, and said, "Tastes like ash." That same morning, we decided to do an inventory check of our supplies. In the small side room that acted as a pantry, we found several bags of rice had rotted overnight. That made no sense. They'd been sealed properly. The instant coffee was full of some black sludge. Even the water in the jugs had turned murky. Sophie gagged when she opened one, and the smell of sulfur wafted through the cabin. Eli just watched this with that blank half-smirk on his face. I asked if he'd noticed anything wrong with the supplies. He shook his head slowly. When I tried to check my phone, it was still dead. The solar charger had apparently shorted out. The analog clock in the kitchen now read 1:10 a.m., even though it was clearly daytime. The entire cabin felt cloaked in a bizarre sense of unreality. Sophie insisted we needed to leave, find a better vantage, or get back to Jarbidge proper. But the nearest route was 8 miles of rough, winding dirt roads, and beyond that, it was another hour or two to the settlement. If we took the truck, we might make it, if it even started. But part of me worried about leaving. I couldn't articulate why. Maybe I didn't trust we'd truly escape. That afternoon, we decided to try the truck. It refused to crank. Eli watched the process from the porch. He never once volunteered to help. Then, when Sophie popped the hood, we discovered the engine compartment was littered with pine needles, as though someone had deliberately stuffed them there. The battery cables were corroded beyond reason, like they'd aged years in a single night. Sophie was nearing a panic, certain that he was causing all this. I kept telling her, "Who is he exactly? Tell me what you saw." She seemed reluctant, as if speaking it aloud would make it real. Finally, she whispered that she'd encountered a tall figure with goat feet and an old-fashioned coat, who demanded she speak her regrets, what sins she carried. When she refused, he let her run. But his final words to her were, "I'll see you at the crossroads." She thought he was a demon, maybe even the devil himself. It sounded insane, but after what I'd witnessed, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. As night fell, the stress in the cabin grew unbearable. The fire refused to stay lit. Every time we got it going, it sputtered and died as if someone were blowing it out. We had enough battery and a flashlight to see by, but the gloom pressed in. Eli mostly stood near the window, humming tunelessly. Sophie and I stayed across the room, sometimes whispering about what to do. Shortly after dark, we lost track of Eli for a moment. He slipped outside without a word. I followed him. Under the pale light of the crescent moon, I saw him standing at the edge of the property, near a ring of aspens, just staring off into the darkness as if listening. I approached carefully, calling, "Eli?" He turned slowly, and when his eyes reflected my flashlight, they looked almost silver, like an animal. It spooked me so bad I stepped back. He said, "He told me a secret, O." I asked, "What secret?" With that same vacant grin, he answered, "We're all lying to ourselves. We think we're free. We're not." I shivered. "Who told you that?" "The man in black," he said. "He's given me so much clarity, but your friend Sophie, she's trouble. She's trying to take you away from me." Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Look out." He grabbed my arm and pulled me aside. I nearly dropped the flashlight. A branch fell from a tree overhead, crashing onto the spot where I'd been standing. I might have been severely hurt if he hadn't yanked me away. Shocked, I stepped back, unsure whether to thank him or question him. He just let out a strange laugh and trudged back toward the cabin. We spent another restless night. I tried to stay awake, but eventually exhaustion hit me. I dozed off, rifle in hand. When I woke at dawn, the living area was empty. The front door stood wide open, letting in a bitter chill. My heart hammered as I jumped up, calling out for Sophie, for Eli. That's when I saw them. Footprints on the dusty cabin floor, going out the door. I followed them to the porch across the yard. 2 sets of footprints side by side. Sophie's smaller prints, Eli's boots. There were drag marks, too, suggesting something heavy was being carried. I ran back for my jacket, shoved my feet into boots, and took off in the direction of the tracks, hoping I wouldn't be too late to stop something horrific. The trail led me deeper into the forest, across a small stream, up a steep incline. The morning sun offered just enough light to see the faint path. I scrambled, nearly twisting my ankle on loose stones. All the while, I dreaded what I might find. My mind pictured the worst. Eli attacking Sophie, or something else entirely. After about 20 minutes, I crested a ridge. That's when I saw Sophie. She stood near a downed log, her back to me, shoulders trembling. As I got closer, I saw Eli's body on the ground in front of her. He was face up, shirt pulled open, and his torso was a canvas of stab wounds, each one leaking dark, almost black blood. Sophie cradled a knife with trembling hands, her breath coming in ragged bursts. I froze, my mind refusing to process it. Eli's eyes were open, staring skyward. He twitched once, as if still half alive. I whispered, "Sophie, what did you do?" She turned around. Her face wore this twisted expression of both horror and triumph. "I had to," she said. "He wasn't Eli anymore. He was hollow. He was something else. He tried to take me to that thing in the woods." Tears shone in her eyes, but her voice was monotone. I approached cautiously, my stomach heaving at the sight of so much blood. "We could have helped him," I said, though deep down I suspected there was no help. I knelt beside Eli. He was gone, no sign of breath. I reached to close his eyelids, but they snapped open again as if locked in rigor. His face held that same eerie grin, though slackened in death. A wave of nausea rolled over me, and I fought the urge to vomit. Sophie stumbled forward, dropping the knife, her eyes glassy. I saved you," she mumbled. "I saved you from him." I didn't know what to do. My best friend lay dead at our feet, and yet I couldn't deny he'd been bizarre, not himself at all. The wind raked through the trees around us, carrying the faint echo of laughter, a man's laughter. I grabbed Sophie's arm. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said, "and figure out a way out of here." She didn't argue. She just followed me, leaving Eli's body behind. There was no time or place to bury him properly. My mind reeled as we hurried back. Everything was wrong. We were isolated in this cursed wilderness with no functioning vehicle, no phone. My friend was dead, and I had no illusions that we were safe. The figure, Red Jack, was still out there, or maybe inside the very air we breathed. When we got back to the cabin, I locked the door, barricaded it with furniture. I turned to Sophie, intending to ask what we should do, but something about her expression made me pause. She was looking around as if the walls themselves might speak. I asked her if she was all right, if she'd been hurt. She gave me a faint smile that lasted a beat too long. "I'm okay now," she said softly. I watched her carefully. "Are you sure?" She pressed her palms to her face, as if trying to wake up from a dream. Then she exhaled and said, "I did what had to be done. He was going to deliver us to that monster. Eli wasn't human anymore." I tried to believe her, but a seed of doubt squirmed inside me. Did she do this because she's terrified, or is she being controlled too? We spent the rest of that day in a heavy silence. The clock on the wall now read 11:59, and the hands weren't moving. My watch had died. The phone was still useless. According to the pale sunlight, it was late afternoon, but I couldn't be sure. Time felt elastic, as if the entire canyon existed in a warped bubble. I stepped outside once to gather wood, wanting to keep the stove going. A frigid wind whipped through the yard, and I noticed the footprints from the day before. My footprints, Sophie's footprints, Eli's footprints were gone, replaced by smooth, undisturbed dirt. It was as if the ground had been swept clean. My stomach sank. I hurried back inside, arms piled with logs. Night fell too quickly. Sophie and I huddled near the wood stove, relying on the dim glow from the fire. We tried to talk about normal things, perhaps out of desperation, like what we missed about city life, or how good a hot shower would feel. Yet something about her was off. She blinked too little. She stared at me a moment too long. Occasionally, she'd let out a little laugh for no clear reason. Tension knotted in my neck. At one point, I decided I'd had enough. I needed some air, needed to step out before I lost my mind. I told Sophie to stay put, that I'd be right back. She nodded with that same vacant smile. As I slipped outside, a swirl of cold air bit my cheeks. The sky was starless, a thick blackness overhead. I had the rifle slung across my shoulder, though I wasn't sure it would do much good against whatever was out here. I walked a few steps from the cabin, peering into the trees. I felt as if the forest was moving, shapes flickering in the edges of my vision. That's when I heard his voice again, the same smooth, echoing baritone from the first night. "I warned you about sundown, Owen. Now look at your friend. You could have saved him." I spun around, heart pounding. Behind me, standing in the threshold of the trees, was Red Jack, the tall, lanky figure in dusty black miner's clothes, a stovepipe hat perched on his head, eyes glowing like embers. And yes, beneath the cuff of his trousers, I saw the unmistakable shape of goat hooves. I squeezed the rifle tight, but he just laughed. "That won't help," he said. "I've walked these canyons longer than you can imagine." My mouth went dry. "What do you want?" I croaked. He tapped a gloved finger to his chin as if thinking. "I want your regrets, your shame, your guilt. That's how I feed, boy. You humans are a wellspring of misery. My favorite spice is betrayal." He flashed a grin, showing too many teeth. "And you know betrayal, don't you? Didn't you cheat on that lovely ex-wife of yours?" My blood ran cold. I never told anyone about that." "No," he said, stepping forward. "But you thought about it when you sat alone in your little cabin, drowning in self-loathing. It was delicious." His eyes flicked to the cabin door. "And that friend of yours, Barton, he was ripe with regrets. But Sophie, she's something special. She's running on pure survival, desperate and cunning. I like that, but she's also easily swayed." A horrifying realization dawned on me. "What did you do to her?" I asked. He shrugged. "I gave her what she wanted, safety, freedom from fear, and now she's a perfect puppet." Rage warred with terror in my chest. I swung the rifle up, aiming at his chest. "Fix her," I demanded, "or so help me." He laughed so hard he nearly doubled over. "You'll do what? Shoot me?" Then, faster than my eyes could track, his hand snapped out and seized the barrel of the rifle, yanking it upward. The impact jarred my arms. His strength was insane. I stumbled back, releasing my grip as he flung the rifle aside. It landed in the dirt with a thud. He pressed closer, his voice low and whispery. "Here's a final offer. Give me a name, a sacrifice. Let's say Sophie. If you hand her over, I'll let you walk free. No more games, no more illusions." I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling. Did he really expect me to betray her to save my own skin? He read the indecision on my face. "Well?" he asked. "I have all the time in the world, but do you?" He vanished without waiting for my answer, like smoke dispersing in the wind. I was left alone, shaking, my lungs struggling to draw breath. I recovered my rifle, though I suspected it was useless. I rushed back into the cabin, frantic, needing to see if Sophie was okay. The door was ajar again, the barricade shoved aside. Inside, the oil lantern we'd set on the table flickered in a swirl of cold air. Sophie stood in the corner, the knife in her hand once more. Her eyes were wide, lips parted in a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "He offered you a deal, didn't he?" she whispered. My heart pounded. "Stay back, Sophie. You're not well." She ran a finger along the knife's edge. "I'm more than well. I'm free. This place can't hurt me now." Her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. She took a step closer. I held out my hands, trying to calm her, but she advanced, raising the knife. "He said you'd trade me," she said. "Is that what you're thinking? Are you going to give me up, Owen?" Her voice trembled with hurt and something else. Fury. "No," I said. "I'm not handing you over to that thing." Her grin broke into a shaky laugh. "But you thought about it, didn't you? Just for a second. That's all it takes." She blinked, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "I can smell it on you," she whispered, "like a dog smells fear. This place, it warps everything. Time, memory, loyalty." She lunged forward. In pure reflex, I twisted away. The knife sliced a line across my jacket sleeve. I yelped, stumbling, and crashed into the table. "Sophie!" I yelled, trying to scramble backwards. She shook her head as if dazed. "I'm sorry," she whimpered. "He's in my head now. I can't stop him." She lunged again, but this time I managed to grab her wrist. We struggled, tumbling across the room until we slammed into the wall. My back ached from the impact. She was surprisingly strong, fueled by fear or adrenaline or something more sinister. The knife hovered near my throat for an agonizing second before I used my knee to push her off. We both collapsed to the floor, panting. I expected her to attack again, but she dropped the knife and clutched her head, a sob rattling from her chest. "Help me," she murmured. "I don't want to be his puppet." I stared at her, heart hammering. For a second, I considered using the rifle, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I grabbed a length of rope we'd used to tie gear and carefully approached her. She didn't resist as I bound her hands, tears staining her cheeks. "I'm sorry," I kept repeating, "but it's for your own safety." For a while, we stayed like that, me crouched in a corner, her lying on the floor, trembling and bound, as the storm of our shared madness raged around us. The wood stove had died out, so the cabin was freezing. The oil lantern flickered, throwing shadows that danced and distorted on the walls. Time lost all meaning. My watch was useless. The analog clock read some nonsense hour, and the window outside was an endless swirl of half-night, half-gloom. Sometime later, hours, minutes, Sophie seemed to drift into a restless sleep. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion overcame me. When I opened my eyes again, the lantern was out. The cabin was dark and silent. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. I whispered, "Sophie?" No response. Then, from the gloom came a raspy voice. "I can let her go, Owen. I can let you both go. You just have to say her name. Offer it to me." I froze. The voice wasn't hers. It belonged to the same entity that had threatened me outside. My eyes adjusted, and I saw a tall shape looming near the window, black against black, as if it were carved from the darkness itself. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. "We'll leave. We'll never come back." "No one leaves Jarbidge Canyon unless I let them," he said. "This place is mine. Always has been." His tone dipped lower. "But you wounded my pride by resisting. So, I want payment. Give me her name willingly, or I'll make her kill you, slowly, piece by piece." I gritted my teeth. I refused to speak. He snorted, then vanished. The gloom settled again, and I realized I was alone. My breath sawed in and out. I crawled across the floor to where I'd left Sophie, half expecting her to leap at me. But she lay there, bound and unconscious, her breath shallow and ragged. When the first dim light of dawn filtered through the frosted windows, I decided we had to leave, no matter what. If we stayed another day, I was certain we'd never walk out of here. I rummaged for what little gear we had left that wasn't ruined. A small pack with a bit of jerky, some stale crackers, water that didn't look too foul. Even that was questionable. I freed Sophie's hands, half carrying, half dragging her to the door. She mumbled something about the man in black, about how he'd never let us go. But I pressed on, a raw determination fueling me. Outside, the air was deathly still. No birds, no insects, as if the entire wilderness was holding its breath. We started walking south, in the direction of the dirt road that eventually led to Jarbidge. My idea was to follow the ridgeline until we hit a recognizable trail. But as soon as we got maybe a mile away, the landscape seemed to shift. I recognized certain rock formations, but they were in the wrong place, as if they'd moved overnight. The compass I had spun aimlessly. For hours we trudged forward, finding ourselves looping back to the same boulder field. Sophie grew feverish, muttering nonsense. She stumbled often, so I had to support her. My nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I kept seeing glimpses of a figure in my periphery, a stovepipe hat among the trees, a flash of hooves stepping behind a rock, as if he was taunting us, letting us wear ourselves down. Finally, near what felt like dusk, though the sky remained a hazy gray, we crossed a small meadow. My spirits lifted, thinking maybe we'd made real progress. But on the far side of that meadow stood my cabin, the same porch, the same shape, as if we'd just circled back. I dropped to my knees, cursing. Sophie broke into sobs. We were trapped in a loop. Despair clung to me. We went inside for shelter. The cabin felt different. The walls were covered in drawings. Amateur charcoal sketches of Red Jack repeated over and over. They definitely hadn't been there before. And each one was signed Owen Hale. My signature in my handwriting. A chill erupted in my veins. I had never drawn these. At least, not that I remembered. At that moment, Sophie let out a low moan and collapsed. I rushed to her side, feeling her forehead. She was burning with fever. Her eyes rolled back and her limbs twitched. "No," I hissed. "No, no, come on." I tried splashing water on her face, but it barely roused her. She whispered something about seeing flames, feeling them under her skin. I felt utterly helpless. Suddenly, there was a thunderous knock at the door. Red Jack walked straight in, as if it were his own house. I had no energy to fight or run. He looked between me and Sophie, his gaze almost pitying. "You humans break so easily," he mused. He took a step closer and I saw that one of his legs was bent at an odd angle. Something was definitely off about his posture. He gave me a grim smile. "One last offer, Owen. Give me her name. Give me your regrets. Renounce them, feed me your betrayal, and you can walk out. You can leave this place." I glared at him, tears stinging my eyes. Why her? Why not take me? He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Because she already belongs to me. I only need you to confirm it. Then the contract is sealed." I looked down at Sophie, who lay there delirious, possibly dying. Could I save her if I refused, or would she be doomed either way? My mind roiled with guilt and fury. In a blind burst of rage, I lunged at Red Jack, driving my shoulder into him. He staggered, an expression of surprise on his face. Then I grabbed the hatchet I'd left by the doorway. With a roar, I brought it down on his leg, the goat-like one, hacking through sinew and bone. The sensation was horrifying, as if I'd chopped into a burning log. Thick, dark fluid spattered across the floor, sizzling as it hit the wood. Red Jack bellowed, an inhuman shriek that made my eardrums feel like bursting. The cabin shuddered, the windows rattling in their frames. A sense of raw power surged through the room, nearly knocking me off my feet. But I kept hold of the hatchet, tearing through whatever was in my way. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. I saw his eyes widen in shock. Then he swiped at me with a clawed hand, catching my leg and twisting it painfully. Bones cracked. I screamed, a white-hot agony lancing up my thigh. My vision dimmed at the edges, but I didn't let go of the hatchet. The walls of the cabin ripped open as if made of paper, revealing a howling void outside. I heard Red Jack's voice roar, "You will pay for this." Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was outside in the snow, my left leg twisted beneath me. The sky was a soft pink, as if it was dawn or dusk. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred with pain. I couldn't see the cabin, couldn't see Sophie. All around me was open wilderness. The trees looked unfamiliar. My arms shook as I tried to push myself upright, but the leg refused to bear weight. I screamed for help, my voice echoing in the silent mountains. No answer. I don't remember how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. Eventually, 2 men in orange vests, hunters, found me. They carried me to their truck, asking questions I could barely answer. I was only half lucid, moaning in agony about a friend named Sophie and a man with hooves. I can still remember their uneasy glances at each other, suspecting I was delirious or on drugs, but they loaded me up and drove me out. They said they'd come from a different part of the Jarbidge wilderness and had heard my screams echoing off the canyon walls. As we made our way down the dirt road, the older one driving turned to me and said, "You ever met a man named Red Jack?" He asked it with a grin that lingered too long on his face. I blacked out. The next time I woke, I was in a small medical clinic. My leg was in a cast, and the local nurse was telling me I'd shattered the bones. She said I was lucky to be alive, but she also said no sign of my cabin existed where the hunters found me, only snowy fields and scattered trees. There wasn't any missing person named Sophie Cutter in the local system. No record of an Eli Barton either, though a few people recalled a man passing through with that name months ago. For weeks, I was stuck in that clinic, recovering. At night, I had nightmares of goat hooves and stovepipe hats, of Sophie's eyes rolled back, of Eli's grin in death. Sometimes, I woke to the sound of knocking at the window, but when I peered through, only my own reflection stared back. Once I was well enough, I left Jarbidge. I never returned to the cabin, if it even was a real cabin. These days, I can't be sure. Now, I'm back in Reno, hobbling around on crutches, haunted by the feeling that none of this is truly over. My leg may never heal properly, and the doctors talk about permanent nerve damage. I can't rid myself of the sense that Red Jack could appear at any moment, grin at me with those ember eyes, and ask if I've made my decision yet, if I'm ready to betray someone for my own survival. I'll catch a reflection in a window sometimes and think I see him standing behind me. I'll hear a slow, rhythmic tapping late at night, as if at my door. And though I'm surrounded by people now, I've never felt more alone. I can't talk about any of this without sounding insane. It's eaten away at my sleep, my peace, and maybe my soul. I tell myself it's over, that by hacking off his leg, I banished him. But in my heart, I know better. The devil of Jarbidge Canyon, Red Jack, doesn't just vanish. He lives in every regret, every betrayal. He waits in the shadows between midnight and dawn, thriving off the darkest corners of the human mind. And sometimes I swear I still see Sophie in a passing crowd, her eyes vacant, a faint smile on her lips, searching for me. Or maybe it's me searching for her, desperate for any clue that she escaped. But she never acknowledges me, if it really is her at all. I don't have neat closure. I can't wrap this up with a moral about trusting your friends or staying away from the wilderness. All I can do is keep going, day by day, step by painful step on my ruined leg. Because the alternative, giving up, might be exactly what he wants. So if you're reading this, consider it a warning. Some places in the world are older and darker than we can understand. Some regrets, once given voice, become living things that feed on us. And if you ever find yourself in that far corner of Nevada, near the Jarbidge wilderness, and you hear knocking at your door after midnight, don't answer it. Because he's still out there, waiting for the next lost soul to swallow whole. And he knows your name already. You just don't know it yet. My name is Jack Turner, and I was 44 years old when these events took place. It all happened in November of 2023, deep within the Arc Dome wilderness in central Nevada, where I've been living off-grid for nearly 2 years. I'm not a veteran or anything like that, just a former mechanic who got tired of the noise, the city lights, and the memories that haunted me. It's funny how I thought isolating myself in the high desert would free me from the past. Instead, I stumbled into something far more terrifying than any trauma I'd carried before. I moved out here in February of 2022, not long after my wife died in a house fire. Her name was Catherine, and I still can't say it without my chest tightening up. She and I had grown up in the same small town back east. We had big dreams, but in the end, we just wanted a quiet life. The fire came in the middle of a freezing night. There was nothing I could do. While the paramedics were loading her into an ambulance, I stood there and felt my mind detach, as if a piece of me burned up with her. Within a month, I quit my job at the auto shop, cashed what was left in my account, and made my way to Nevada. Why Nevada? Because no one I knew lived there, because it was harsh, lonely, and away from reminders of her empty seat at the kitchen table. For a year and a half, things were okay, I guess. I built myself a small cabin out in the Arc Dome wilderness. I was methodical about it, brought up solar panels, rigged a radio, even set up a cistern to collect rain. Daryl Watts, my only friend out here, would make supply runs for me once every couple of months. He was younger than me by 7 years and had more of a wild streak, but we got along. He liked to joke that he was the only man insane enough to ride an ATV through the desert just to see my sorry face. I never told him, but I appreciated it more than he ever knew. I kept a routine in that cabin. Sunrise, I'd check the solar batteries and write in a journal to track each day, weather conditions, my mood, any wildlife I spotted. It grounded me. I was alone in a sea of junipers, rugged hills, and winding draws, but the routine gave me a sense that time was orderly. Then, last month, something started to change. The first sign was subtle. I noticed the sun seemed to set a little earlier each evening, and it rose an hour late one morning by my watch. But my watch was mechanical, a wind-up, and had always been reliable. I shrugged it off as a simple malfunction. Maybe dust and grit got in there. But a chill crept into my bones that day and never really left. I wasn't prepared for how quickly things would escalate. I'm no stranger to the weird. Living alone can make you jump at shadows or hear voices on the wind. But what I encountered wasn't just my imagination. It began with a deer. Late October, I bagged a young mule deer while out hunting about 2 miles from my cabin. I'm not a sport hunter, just a man who needs food, so I field-dressed it carefully. In the gentle glow of the afternoon sun, the carcass looked healthy. The flesh was pink and fresh. The animal wasn't diseased. I carried the meat back in 2 large packs, planning to preserve most of it. I let it hang that evening in the cool outside air. By morning, the meat had turned gray-green, swarmed with writhing white grubs that must have grown overnight. Impossible. No normal maggots appear and mature that fast, especially in near-freezing temperatures. I gagged as I saw them seething in the early dawn light. I forced myself to bury the carcass. I wanted to burn it, but the thought of that many maggots popping or sizzling was more than I could stomach. When I picked up one of the rotted hunks, it split in half and spilled out these wriggling white lumps that slithered off into the dirt. The stench was overwhelming. I remember retching, tears streaming down my face, my mind screaming that it didn't make sense. Maggots can't breed or grow that fast in cold. Something was wrong in a way I couldn't name. I tried to focus on normal chores. I went to my small woodpile to split logs for a fire. The crisp morning air felt suffocating, as though every gust of wind was pushing me out of my own camp. I set up tinder in my fire pit, struck a match, and waited. It ignited, flickered, and a moment later the flame turned a faint blue and died. No matter what dry tinder I used or how much kindling, the fire just wouldn't stay lit. I even tried dousing it with lighter fluid. That flare died in seconds, leaving me with a wisp of foul-smelling smoke. Eventually, by sheer force of will, I got enough of a smolder to warm my coffee. But it was an omen of things to come. 3 days later, the nights grew unnaturally long. By my best estimate, the sky was going dark around 4 in the afternoon, and not lighting up again until 9 the next day. That's 5 extra hours of night, and I had no way to measure it beyond my wind-up watch and sense of the stars. I decided to test if maybe my watch was running too fast or too slow, so I wound it up carefully and placed it next to an old battery-powered clock I kept around. The next day, the battery clock had inexplicably died. Maybe the cold killed it. The watch, too, had lost almost 4 hours. All around me, the rhythms of nature were warping in ways I couldn't rationalize. I wrote it all in my journal. November 2nd. Wrote the sunrise time, the sunset time, the weather. But the next morning, half the lines were missing. The writing looked like my handwriting, though faint and smeared, as if I had erased them. But I had no eraser, and I definitely did not remove them. I slammed the journal shut, thinking maybe I was just exhausted, depressed, or losing my mind. But the intangible dread continued to grow. The morning of November 5th, I found footprints. At first, I thought they were coyote tracks, but they were shaped like cloven hooves, except each hoof was as long as my foot. They circled my cabin, weaving in figure eights. There was no sign of them leading away, just circles that overlapped with no beginning or end. I stared at the tracks for almost an hour, not sure what to do. I eventually tossed a handful of snow over them as if covering them might erase what I'd seen. That afternoon, I walked to the ridgeline where the wind turbines used to be, hoping to get a bit of phone signal from a vantage point. Sometimes, I'd get 1 or 2 bars if the atmosphere cooperated. The phone turned on, but it was stuck in a constant reboot loop, like it had been tampered with. I had no illusions that the authorities would help. Still, some part of me wanted a voice from the outside to say, "Hey man, you're not going crazy." I never got the chance. The phone died for good. I stumbled back to my cabin in the gray twilight. And that's when the second wave of horrors began. My dog, Max, had died a year ago. He was an old black lab with a stiff walk, loved to follow me around and nap at my feet. That night, around midnight, I heard his bark outside. My heart froze. It was unmistakable, the same tone and pitch, the way he used to bark twice and whine for me to let him in. I threw open the door, adrenaline pounding, but saw only blackness and swirling flakes of snow. My flashlight revealed fresh dog tracks leading off into the trees. I followed them for a short distance, calling Max's name in vain. I might have followed them longer if I hadn't noticed they morphed. The tracks changed shape halfway along, from paw prints into something elongated and disturbingly human-like. I fled back inside, slamming the door, half convinced I was going insane. November 7th. That morning, I woke up freezing. My fire was completely out. The logs I'd stacked inside the night before were gone. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, but I had no memory of getting up. As I stepped out of bed, I noticed my radio was on the table, broadcasting a steady hiss of static. I never leave it on overnight. Eventually, I discerned faint laughter threading through the static, like a voice just on the edge of reception. I gripped the radio and almost flung it to the floor, but something made me keep listening. My own name bubbled up through the hiss, pronounced in a breathy whisper. "Jack! Jack! Jack!" I cut power to the radio and collapsed to my knees, head in my hands. Something out there was tormenting me, or maybe it was in here, inside me. That day, Daryl arrived. I heard his ATV first, whining through the valleys, echoing off the canyons. Relief flooded me, though it was mixed with dread. Part of me worried I'd pounce on him in hysterics, ranting about ghosts and rotting meat. Yet, ironically, seeing his crooked grin and weathered face was like stepping back to reality. He hopped off the ATV in front of my cabin with a big wave. "Jack!" he called. "Still living, old man?" "Barely," I muttered. We took the supplies inside and I tried to act normal. Daryl carried the usual: coffee, dried goods, extra batteries. He'd picked up a small package from some buddy he had in Carson City. We drank coffee together, and for a moment, everything felt stable. He teased me about not shaving. I teased him about that limp of his, and he chuckled, explaining that it was bothering him more than usual. A biting wind roared outside, but inside we let the tiny wood stove do its job. However, the tension returned when Daryl noticed my shaky hands and asked what was wrong. I tried to downplay it, talking about the deer rotting too fast, the weird footprints. As soon as I started explaining, I sounded crazy even to my own ears. I expected him to laugh or call me a paranoid recluse, but something glinted in his eyes. He seemed uneasy, like he believed me. He turned thoughtful. "Jack, have you seen anything else out there, like a tall man or something?" I blinked, caught off guard. "No. Why would you ask that?" Daryl ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. "Just local rumors. Ranchers talk about the weird stuff that creeps in from the desert. Don't worry about it." He paused. "Hey, I need to piss. I'll be right back." I watched him duck outside, coffee mug in hand, limping down my front steps into the yard. For once, there was an odd tension in how he walked, as if he felt something was watching him. He was gone a while. When he came back, he looked rattled. He sat down at my table, silent, his expression drawn. I asked what was wrong. He said he saw footprints in the snow just beyond the cabin, a set of large cloven hooves, and another set of what looked like dog prints that turned into a man's footprints. I nodded, feeling the hair on my arms rise. That night, Daryl decided to stay over. The plan was to head back at sunrise. We spent the evening in grim silence, keeping a single lantern on. The wood stove was blazing, but the flames flickered a disturbing shade of blue whenever the wind howled. We tried to ignore it. We talked quietly about old times, how I'd fixed his truck for free once, how we used to fish together. I was so desperate for normalcy that the conversation felt almost sacred. Sometime around midnight, I drifted off in my chair. When I jerked awake, the cabin was in darkness. The lantern was out, and the wood stove embers glowed faintly. I called for Daryl, but got no answer. My heart pounded. Fumbling around, I found my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam showed Daryl standing in a corner. His back was to me. His arms hung limp at his sides. "Daryl?" I whispered. He slowly turned around. In the flashlight's glare, I could see his eyes were closed. He wore this wide grin that made my skin crawl. He said nothing, just grinned and breathed slowly, in and out. I took a step forward, and he collapsed onto the floor limp as a rag doll. I rushed over. His eyes flew open in panic. He had no idea what he'd been doing. I felt too sick to explain. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. It was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. At dawn, Daryl insisted on getting out of there. He told me to come with him, but I refused. The idea of riding on his ATV to a dirt road miles away and then heading back to civilization didn't feel right. This was my home, and I needed to protect it, though from what I wasn't sure. Besides, part of me was stubborn or maybe traumatized. I just couldn't abandon the last 2 years of my life. He left around 8 in the morning, or what I thought was 8. My watch read 8 anyway. By noon, I realized something horrifying. Daryl's backpack was still in my cabin, tossed near the front door. He must have left in such a hurry he didn't notice. I rummaged through it, intending to see if he'd left anything important behind. Instead, I found a row of bones. Small vertebrae, knuckle bones, finger bones, sitting at the bottom, each tied with a strip of cloth. The cloth had the name Daryl scrawled over and over in black marker. At first, I thought it was a sick joke or some bizarre superstition I'd never known he had. Then, I found a ring on one of the fingers. A gold band with DW plus AC engraved on the inside. That was Daryl's wedding ring from his ex-wife Annabelle. My stomach flipped. The bones were covered in a sticky film, like they'd been freshly plucked from a decaying body. I nearly dropped the bag. My thoughts churned. Were these his bones? Or someone else's? Why were they in his pack? I had no answers. The fear that maybe Daryl had been replaced by something else only grew. Then I had the opposite fear. Maybe the real Daryl had been somehow killed, and the one who left my cabin was some imposter. I felt helplessly lost. My mind drifted back to the footprints, the weird illusions, that grin on his face. None of it made sense within a normal frame of reference. I tried to pass the day by reorganizing my supplies, but discovered that half my stock was ruined. The coffee grounds reeked of mildew. Dried beans looked maggot-infested. Packages of noodles had turned mushy, as though wet. It was as if rot and decay traveled faster in my presence. The air in my cabin tasted stale, like old crypt dust. When I tried to gather firewood from my stack, I found it gone. The entire stack had disappeared, leaving only a scattered circle of sawdust. Furious and frightened, I paced around the cabin. That was when the voices started. Quiet at first, just on the edge of hearing. "Jack! Jack!" Repeated with no source, I pressed my hands to my ears. The voice sounded like Catherine's, my deceased wife. She sounded distressed, calling my name as she had that last night. Smoke searing my lungs, the echo of her cry for help. My breath came in ragged gasps. I told myself it wasn't real. I stepped outside to get away from it, but it followed me. A cold wind battered my face. The sky was an overcast, sickly gray. My footprints vanished as soon as I stepped away from them, the snow swirling unnaturally. That evening, near twilight, or what felt like twilight, a sudden hailstorm whipped through the area. The wind shrieked around the cabin, rattling the windows. The stinging hail battered the roof so hard I thought it might collapse. I peered out a window. Through the storm, I saw a figure approaching. Tall, lean, wrapped in a dark coat that barely shifted in the gale. He walked calmly, as though the hail meant nothing. I reached for my rifle. When I looked back, he was at my doorstep, gloved hand raised to knock. I opened the door with trembling arms, rifle clutched at my side. He stepped in, smiling. He was striking. Pale skin, sharp features, black hair slicked back like an old-time gentleman. He didn't remove his coat, though it dripped with hail and water. He introduced himself in a velvet, smooth voice. "I'm Lucian. Pardon my intrusion." "What the hell do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He raised his eyebrows, amused. "I sensed your loneliness, thought I might keep you company." I demanded he leave, but he just shook his head with a faint, knowing smirk. "I cannot leave, Jack, until you do, but you won't, will you?" Hearing him speak my name sent a shiver through me. I never told him my name. With a wave of his hand, he gestured at the hail pelting the windows. "Harsh weather," he said lightly. "Not fit for travel." He acted as if we were old friends. My grip on the rifle tightened. I wanted to shoot him or scream at him, but my words stuck in my throat. Some irrational part of me sensed that pulling the trigger wouldn't matter. He strolled about, hands clasped behind his back, examining my cabin. He paused at the journal on the table. "Ah," he said. "You keep track of time here." He traced a finger over the scribbled entries. "Time is such a fragile thing. I wonder how long it'll keep bending for you." Then he turned to me, his eyes glowing faintly. "You're close now, Jack. Just a little more, and it'll be yours." He wouldn't explain what he meant. He pulled out my only chair, sat down, and grinned at me like he owned the place. With a flourish, he produced a small match from his coat and struck it against the table. The flame was steady and bright, unaffected by the draft that snuffed out my fires earlier. The light cast unnerving shadows on his face. "Why are you here?" I croaked. He shrugged. "Why's anyone here? We arrive, we visit, we collect. That's my part, I collect." A wave of dizziness washed over me. I sank to the floor, feeling like my cabin walls were pulsing. I heard a sound from the corner of the room, a scraping, like nails on wood. I aimed my flashlight. Nothing. When I turned back, Lucian was gone. The door was still closed. The hail battered the roof. I was alone again. The only proof he'd been there was a single black glove lying on my table, dripping with hail melt. The rest of that night I cowered in the corner of my bed, rifle on my lap, determined not to sleep. If I drifted off, I dreamed of my wife, burned flesh peeling off her arms, crawling across the cabin floor, whispering, "Jack, come with me." I'd jolt awake in a sweat, hearing movement in the walls. Dawn came eventually, or I think it did. The gray sky was a smudge that gave me no real sense of time. I decided to do something proactive. I'd read once that silver was supposed to harm evil spirits or devils, or whatever the hell Lucian was. I had a few small silver items saved from Catherine's old jewelry box, gifts I couldn't part with. It felt awful to desecrate them, but I hammered them into a makeshift spike. I fashioned a cross from some leftover rebar, forging it over the wood stove until it glowed, then affixed the silver spike to the tip. It was crude as can be, but my desperation overshadowed any sentimentality. Throughout the day, I saw illusions out of the corner of my eye. Max, the dog, trotting by, a burning figure that resembled Catherine. That same tall shape of Lucian, leaning around corners. None of it was solid or consistent. I felt reality slipping from me. My watch said 4 in the afternoon, but the sun was shining directly overhead in a harsh glare. Then it blinked out behind a sudden swirl of dark clouds. The sun was replaced by 2 smaller, sickly orange disks that lingered in the sky for less than a minute, then vanished. I stood in my yard, mouth open, not sure if I was hallucinating. My mind drifted to the possibility that I'd been poisoned or was having a psychotic break, but the dread felt too real. Sometime later, I couldn't say how long, I thought I saw Daryl's ATV near the tree line. My pulse raced at the chance he'd come back. I jogged over, ignoring the biting cold. Instead, I found only tracks in the snow that led me in a wide circle, back to the cabin. The footprints around the ATV tracks were barefoot, human-like. They ended at my porch. Furious, I stomped inside only to find something scratched into my wooden wall. "He's been borrowed. Return the favor." I rummaged for my rifle, checking if I was fully armed. That's when I noticed a horrifying sight on my front step. Daryl's severed hand pinned under a rusted bear trap, the stump still wet with blood. The hand was twitching, fingers curling as if trying to free itself. I gagged and staggered away. Outside, I glimpsed a figure in black between the trees. He stood motionless, face in shadow. I knew it was Lucian. I pointed my rifle at him, but my finger froze on the trigger. He vanished like a mirage. I approached the trap, heart hammering. The hand was undeniably Daryl's. He had a distinct scar across his knuckles from a broken bottle years ago. And that scar was there. But how? Was it truly his? Or some twisted mockery? Could he still be alive somewhere? I used a shovel to pry the trap open, trying not to touch the hand. It fell limp to the porch, blood staining the boards. When I regained my composure, I placed it in a garbage bag, breath hitching. I glanced at the ring finger. No ring this time. The ring must have been in that backpack. I stared at the bag, tears on my cheeks, terror and rage swirling inside me. Then Lucian spoke from behind me. "Would you like to give up now, Jack?" I whirled around, rifle raised. He was standing in my doorway, his unblinking eyes reflecting the candlelight. Before I could fire, he said, "I can release you from all this. No more guilt, no more illusions." He opened one hand as though offering a gift. "I know you blame yourself for the fire that took your Catherine. I can erase that burden. Just let me collect." His words made me tremble. Part of me wanted to surrender. Another part wanted to kill him. Without warning, I rushed him with the silver spike, plunging it toward his chest. He laughed as he sidestepped, moving almost supernaturally fast. The spike grazed his coat, leaving a faint scorch mark behind. He hissed in annoyance. "You'll regret that," he said. Then the storm outside ramped up again, thunder rattling the walls. My lantern blew out, leaving us in near total darkness. I heard Lucian's laughter swirl around me. When I managed to reignite the lantern with trembling hands, he was gone. Time unraveled further. That night, I saw Daryl's face at the window, pressing up against the glass, eyes wide in terror. I swung the door open, but no one was there. Moments later, I heard him screaming from the tree line, calling my name. I grabbed the rifle and sprinted out. The screaming guided me deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone at night. The snowfall was thick, flakes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I came upon a dead tree, bark peeled away, revealing a hollow inside. A shape lay within it, crouched. It was Daryl, or at least something wearing his face. He stared at me with an impossibly wide grin. His eyes were empty black pits. Then he vanished into the darkness. Only a faint, mocking chuckle remained. I ran until I collapsed. When I found my way back to the cabin, it was daylight. My watch read 3 a.m, but the sky claimed noon. Confusion dominated me. Exhaustion weighed on every cell in my body, and the hollowness in my stomach told me I hadn't eaten in at least a day. My solar panels gave me some power, but the lights flickered in an odd rhythm. I had no sense of time beyond perpetual fear. That evening, or maybe the next, I decided enough was enough. I carefully poured kerosene around the inside perimeter of the cabin. This place was tainted. I'd burn it down and find my way out, come hell or high water. I stepped outside, rifle slung over my shoulder, the silver spike jammed in my belt. One last time, I looked at the building that had been my home for 2 years. My heart squeezed. I remembered building it with my own hands. But it was no longer just a cabin. It felt like a trap, a prison in the middle of a warped wilderness. I struck a match. Immediately, the structure was engulfed in roaring flames, burning an eerie greenish hue that made me stagger back in alarm. I heard screaming, though I was alone. As the roof caved, a tall, black silhouette appeared amid the flames. Lucian. He strode out of the fire, coat untouched, smiling a predator's smile. "Jack, you disappoint me," he said softly. "Leaving so soon?" Rage and terror collided in me. I charged him, brandishing the silver spike. This time, I aimed for his chest and slammed it in with all my strength. He let out a guttural shriek, the first time I'd seen him lose his composure. His body convulsed, the edges of his form flickering as though he were made of smoke and cinders. He lurched, clawing at me. His left hand caught my thigh, nails slicing through my pants, carving flesh. I bit back a scream and pushed harder on the spike. The rebar cross glowed, blackening his coat. His face shifted from handsome to something twisted and scorched, mouth full of blackened teeth. Steam and ash poured from his wounds. Even in agony, he laughed. "You think you've won? Time doesn't belong to you anymore." Then, with inhuman strength, he hurled me backward. I crashed against a rock, my rifle flying from my grasp. Pain shot up my side and I felt something crack in my ribs. A swirl of sparks from the cabin flew overhead, lighting the sky an ominous red. On my hands and knees, spitting blood, I watched him stagger, pinned by that silver spike. With a sound like an inferno, he burst into a swirl of black smoke and twisted into himself, leaving behind only a charred mark in the ground. The spike clattered to the dirt, silver tip glowing white-hot. I collapsed, trying to stifle the pain. Blood seeped down my leg from the gashes. The cabin burned behind me, the crackle of wood overshadowed by the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe it was done, that I'd banished him, or at least hurt him enough to make him retreat, but I knew better. There was no sense of relief. The night air was still thick with an unnatural presence, as though the entire wilderness was watching and waiting. I tore strips off my shirt to bandage my leg. Then I limped away from the burning cabin, heading east. My plan was to reach the nearest dirt road, maybe 15 miles away, if I was guessing correctly. I'd have to pick my way along ridges and washes in the dark. The flashlight in my pack had a cracked lens, but it still worked. The wind battered me, carrying faint moans that could have been the wind in the pines, or something else entirely. As I trudged up a slope, time lurched again. Suddenly, it was broad daylight, the sun at zenith. No dawn or morning, just an instant shift from midnight to midday. My watch read 1 in the morning. My eyes burned from the glaring light. My mind reeled. I forced myself to keep going, panting from the pain in my ribs. Eventually, the sun dimmed without setting. The sky tinted a strange bruised purple. I don't know how many hours I walked. My leg throbbed, every step a fresh wave of agony. A drizzle of freezing rain stung my skin. Finally, I spotted something in the distance, a dirt road that snaked along the base of some foothills. Relief mixed with dread. I had no idea if civilization would save me from whatever had claimed me. I staggered onto the road. It was heavily rutted, the ground damp. My flashlight flickered, nearly dead, but I spotted headlights in the distance. A truck was approaching, its engine rumbling. I stumbled into the middle of the road, waving my arms. The truck's brakes squealed, and it stopped, dust swirling around the headlights. I squinted, not quite believing I'd found help. The driver's side door opened. A man hopped out, wearing a dusty jacket and a baseball cap. "Jesus Christ, are you all right?" he shouted, striding toward me. My mouth felt full of cotton. "Help," I croaked, tears threatening to spill. I was so relieved I almost collapsed. He guided me to the passenger seat, eyes wide at my injuries. "What happened to you?" I didn't know how to explain. He rummaged in the back seat for a med kit and offered me a water bottle. I gulped it down, the water so cold it hurt my teeth. He asked me if I needed a hospital. I nodded weakly. He offered to drive me into town. I sank against the seat, half delirious, as he shifted gears. We started down the road. For the first time in days, normalcy seemed possible. The truck's headlights cut through the gloom. My heart pounded in a slow, steady rhythm. Then he glanced over. "Been out here a while?" "Yeah," I mumbled, forcing a pained smile. "Too long. He looked at me sympathetically. "Name's Jace," he said. "Folks round here call me Jay." He turned the wheel to avoid a pothole. Every jostle made my ribs scream, but I felt gratitude ballooning in my chest. If he could just get me to a hospital or even a phone, maybe I could get real help. I prayed Lucian was gone for good. We drove in silence for a long stretch. The road curved around a rocky outcrop. The truck's tires crunched on gravel. My exhaustion caught up with me, and I started drifting off, head lolling against the window. Then I saw a flicker in the side mirror, a figure walking behind us at impossible speed. I snapped, fully awake. The figure vanished. Heart pounding, I turned to Jace, about to speak, but he was staring at me in a way that made my blood run cold. His gaze was fixed, unblinking. A too-wide grin crept across his face. I watched in horror as his eyes rolled back, leaving only white. The truck swerved, the engine revving. He spoke, but the voice wasn't Jace's. It was deeper, layered, too resonant. "Did you think it would be so easy?" he asked, face contorting. "You belong to me, Jack." I fought for the steering wheel, trying to keep us from crashing. We careened toward a ditch. At the last second, I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, dust and rocks flying. We came to a violent stop. My ribs exploded in pain and I gasped for air. Jace's body jerked, convulsing. Then he tore open the door and stumbled out. I followed, unwilling to be trapped inside with him. Outside, the sky was dark again, starless. Jace turned to me, eyes now black as pitch. "Time means nothing," he hissed. "I can wait as long as it takes, Jack." His voice dissolved into manic laughter. I realized with cold certainty that Lucian hadn't left. Maybe I'd hurt him, but now he wore someone else, like a suit of flesh. Holding my side, I backed away. Jace/Lucian advanced with unnatural grace. My rifle was gone, lost in the wilderness behind me. My only weapon was the silver spike, but that, too, was back near the burning cabin. I had nothing but my fists and a broken body. He lunged at me. I dodged, ignoring the agony in my ribs. My leg gave out, sending me sprawling in the gravel. He pinned me, pressing a hand to my throat. I glimpsed his face shifting. Flashes of Daryl's grin, Catherine's burned features, even my own face. The horror of seeing my own eyes glare back made me retch. My vision darkened. I clawed at his arm, trying to loosen his grip. Suddenly, a flood of headlights illuminated us. Another vehicle was coming around the bend. Lucian, Jace hissed and released me, stepping back. The approaching truck slowed. I saw two silhouettes in the cab. Lucian's grin returned. "Another time," he whispered. Then he flickered, shape twisting, and vanished into the night, leaving only the real Jace's crumpled body on the ground. I stared in disbelief. Jace was unconscious, a faint pulse fluttering in his neck. The second truck stopped. A pair of ranchers, an older man and his adult daughter, rushed over to see what was going on. They found me panting, kneeling over the unconscious Jace. The daughter checked his vitals while the father shone a flashlight in my eyes, asking a million questions. I just babbled about devils and illusions, tears burning my face. I must have looked insane. They helped me and Jace into their truck and drove us off into the night, radioing for help on a shortwave set they had in the cab. I felt relief, but also a gaping sense of dread. We reached a small ranch property with a phone. They called an ambulance from the nearest town. By the time paramedics arrived, I'd passed out from a mix of pain, exhaustion, and shock. In my half-lucid dreams, I saw Lucian's face laughing, saw Daryl's severed hand crawling like a spider, saw the rotted deer meat and the silver spike blackening. I also saw Catherine, her voice whispering, "Time doesn't matter. I'm still here." I woke in a hospital bed a day later. My ribs were taped up. My leg was stitched. The doctors told me I was malnourished, dehydrated, borderline hypothermic. My recollection of events sounded unbelievable, so I told them I'd been attacked by a wild animal. They accepted it, or at least pretended to. Over the next few days I recovered physically, but my mind never fully left that wilderness. The authorities questioned me about the remains of my cabin, which apparently had burned down completely. They found no sign of Daryl. A search was conducted. No one found a body, though they discovered his ATV abandoned on a ridge. No footprints to track, no answers. It was as if he vanished off the face of the earth. People asked if I'd murdered him. I told the truth. I don't know where he is. I saw pity in their eyes and suspicion. Eventually, I was released from the hospital. I rented a cheap motel room in a nearby town, trying to figure out my next step. I'd lost my home, my supplies, and possibly my sanity. One cold morning, I stepped outside to find a black glove sitting on the hood of my borrowed car. A glove identical to the one Lucian left on my table. I stared at it for a long time, paralyzed. When I finally worked up the nerve to approach, it vanished like smoke in my hands. I tried calling old friends back east. The calls never connected or dropped. I tried emailing from a local library, but the messages never got a reply. It was as though life outside that wilderness no longer existed for me, or maybe I didn't exist for it. After a week in the motel, I decided to leave Nevada altogether. I packed my meager belongings, mostly clothes and a battered duffel bag. The father-daughter ranchers gave me a ride to a bus station 2 towns over. The daughter handed me a small cross pendant made of cheap metal. She said it was for luck. I thanked her. Before I stepped onto the bus, I looked back at the dusty parking lot. Standing next to a battered vending machine was a tall, dark figure. Even at that distance, I knew it was Lucian. He tilted his head, smiling. No one else seemed to see him. I felt my knees weaken. Then he raised a hand, waving slowly, mockingly. I boarded the bus, heart hammering. The door hissed shut, and we pulled away. I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. Time no longer felt stable to me, even in broad daylight with normal people around. My watch was stuck at 3:15, ticking but never changing. Maybe I was free of that place, but Lucian wouldn't forget me, I knew that. He'd always be there, in the corner of my vision, in the static of a radio, in the unnatural rustle of leaves at night. I never learned what became of Daryl's body, or if he'd been possessed and devoured or simply stolen. He was borrowed, as the words on my wall said. Maybe one day Lucian would appear wearing his face again. The thought haunts me every time I see a tall stranger in a crowd, or a man wearing a black coat in the distance. I still dream of Arc Dome, dream of green flames devouring my cabin, dream of Catherine's voice begging me to save her, dream of footprints that lead nowhere. In some dreams, I manage to kill Lucian for good. In others, he kills me. In the worst ones, I accept his offer, let him collect my soul in exchange for relief from my guilt. That dream always ends in darkness, with me wide-eyed and smiling at my own reflection. I don't know which is worse, living in fear or surrendering to the emptiness he offers. I've written all of this so maybe someone, somewhere, can believe me. If you ever find yourself in the lonely stretches of Nevada wilderness, pay attention to time. If it warps, if your watch fails, if you hear your name whispered in the wind, run. Because once he has your name, he'll never let you go. And if he offers you freedom, remember, there's always a price, one you'll pay long after your mind and body are broken. I'm proof that some terrors don't end, no matter how far you run. They follow, just beyond the veil of reason, and wait for you to slip. Because out in that vast emptiness, in those quiet, freezing nights, There's something that collects the lost, the lonely, and the guilty. And when it does, time itself distorts, replays, and devours. I can't say I escaped, I can only say I survived. For now. My name is James Holloway. I'm 32 years old. This happened in August 2024, deep in the Ruby Mountains of northeastern Nevada. I want to write it all down before the memories slip through my fingers completely, because I suspect I won't remain myself for very long. I have pages of notes, half burned, scrawled in my own handwriting. Some of it is pure nonsense. Some of it I wish were nonsense. I'll try to tell you everything as faithfully as I can. I came to the Ruby Mountains, specifically Echo Canyon, looking for solitude. I didn't want to see people. I wanted nature to cradle me and keep me far from the life I used to know. Just a few months earlier, I lost my job as a freelance graphic designer, burned every professional bridge, and ended my engagement with the woman I thought I'd marry. Financially, I was tanking, but I had enough in savings to stock up on supplies for a month and survive off-grid. Part of me wondered if I was punishing myself, or simply looking to vanish for a while. Maybe both. I had only one companion for this trip, my dog, Ranger, a 2-year-old Belgian Malinois who was more intelligent than some people I've known. Ranger had been with me through everything, and I admit I talked to him like he could understand every word. Sometimes I think he did. He had a habit of tilting his head and blinking in just the right way, as if he was about to respond. We arrived at the base of the Ruby Mountains on the 1st of August. I parked my old Ford pickup near a lesser-known trailhead in an area I'd scouted on a map for a semi-secluded route. The plan was to hike 2 days in, find a spot by a creek, and then make a more permanent camp. There are actually more popular campgrounds around Lamoille Canyon or Thomas Canyon, but I wanted something lonely. Ranger trotted at my side, wagging his tail at the crisp air. It was surprisingly cool for Nevada in August, especially up in elevation. I felt an odd sense of relief, as if the mountains had exhaled and welcomed me. I had a topographic map, a compass, and my phone's GPS. I wasn't worried about losing my way. The trail was tough but manageable, and we had plenty of water. Ranger seemed to love every minute, sniffing around for squirrels or chasing the birds that fluttered by. By the second day, we reached a broad canyon with rocky outcrops stretching high on either side. The map labeled it Echo Canyon, though I couldn't find many references to that name online. The place looked perfect, quiet, overshadowed by jagged peaks, with a narrow creek that trickled in from the north. The moment I arrived, it felt both peaceful and oddly charged, as if the air itself hummed. I wrote that off as nerves or excitement. I set up my tent near the creek, gathered stones for a fire pit, and used the last of the daylight to double-check the area. Ranger sniffed at some old stone marker partially buried near a stand of twisted trees. The marker was about 3 feet high, covered in moss, carved with faded inscriptions that might have been old graffiti or runes. I couldn't tell. I remember kneeling to look at it, running my fingers across the grooves. They felt almost warm. Ranger let out a soft whine, so I shrugged it off and finished making camp. That night, I tried to call my sister, only to find the phone battery was down to 1%. That didn't make any sense. I'd charged it in the truck just the day before, and I hadn't used it much. Ranger was dozing by the fire, so I walked around, searching for any sign of a usable signal or a reason for the battery drain. But the phone just died in my hand. The firelight flickered strangely, giving off occasional blue-green sparks. The logs were normal, just dry wood I'd collected. Maybe it was a mineral deposit in the wood or resin. In any case, I was too tired to worry, so I put my phone away and turned in. The next 2 days passed mostly as expected. I fished a little, filtered water, took short hikes around the canyon. My sleeping bag was comfortable, and Ranger and I had a routine. The only red flag was that my GPS kept malfunctioning, showing me at random points miles away. I'd try turning it off and on again. It would find me, then lose me within minutes. My compass, at least, seemed reliable. I figured the canyon walls or the atmospheric conditions were messing with my GPS, and I didn't dwell too long on it. I even noted, in my small journal, that the Ruby Mountains were more remote than I'd realized. Some strange magnetic issues, perhaps. On the 5th night, I woke to the sound of Ranger growling low. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I realized he was at the mouth of the tent, lips curled. I unzipped the tent and peeked out, half expecting a bear or a mountain lion. Instead, I saw him. A man standing near the still glowing embers of my campfire. He was tall, wearing a neat button-down shirt and jeans. He held his palms up like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it at him. He shielded his face, but his smile remained. He looked so calm, so strangely poised. "Sorry if I startled you," he said, voice low and smooth. "I'm just passing through. My name's Lucian." I didn't speak right away. Who the hell finds themselves at my remote camp at, what, midnight? I'm not even sure. The moon was high, though. Ranger's growling dropped to a rumble in his chest, and he sat on his haunches, hackles raised. Lucian didn't flinch. "Would it be all right if I warmed myself by your fire?" It was a surreal moment. I wanted to shout at him to back off or ask where the hell he came from. Instead, I nodded automatically. Some survival sense told me not to escalate the situation. "Yeah, sure. Warm yourself." He smiled more broadly. It was a too-perfect smile. White teeth in the flicker of fading embers. He crouched by the fire, lightly blew on it, and I swear the flames responded as if they'd been stoked by fresh wood. He held his palms out over the coals. I zipped the tent enough to keep Ranger inside with me. The dog wouldn't stop staring at him, ears pinned back. My heart was pounding. Eventually, I forced myself out of the tent, standing just a few feet away from him, holding a small hatchet behind my back in case he tried anything. "You're far from the usual trails," I said, trying to sound casual. "You hike up here alone?" Lucian turned to look at me. His eyes glimmered with the reflection of the fire. He nodded. "I like the solitude. You do too, don't you?" He said it so matter-of-factly it made my skin crawl. After a few awkward minutes, I offered him some leftover coffee from earlier. It was cold and tasted like burnt beans, but he drank it as though it were nectar. We made small talk, except it was mostly him talking, me listening. He spoke about how he enjoyed meeting kindred souls. It took him half a sentence to guess I was there to escape something, and he asked if I wanted help letting go. The weirdness was too much for me, so I pretended I needed rest, suggested he move on in the morning. He smiled and said that was fine, so I crawled back into my tent. Ranger lay across my legs, trembling. We listened for the stranger to do something, anything, but the night stayed quiet. In the morning, I jerked awake at the sound of birds. My watch read 7 a.m., though the sunlight felt harsh enough to be noon. I hurried out of the tent, blinking in the glare. Lucian was gone. The campsite looked undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of him. I spun around, half convinced I'd hallucinated him, until I saw the coffee cup I'd lent him. It lay by the fire pit, washed clean. My phone was still dead, so there was no chance of calling for advice or sending any texts. I told myself it was just a weird encounter. Ranger was subdued, but not hostile. I decided to break camp, push farther downstream, and see if I could find a different site. I wanted distance from that stone marker, from the place where Lucian had appeared. About an hour later, I realized Ranger wasn't at my side. Usually, if he lagged behind, he'd come bounding up when I whistled. I whistled once, twice, nothing. Then I felt a spike of cold fear in my gut. For half the day, I retraced my steps, calling out his name. Not even an echo answered. I returned to the old campsite by evening, thinking maybe he'd found his way back there. I found tracks, but they petered out near that carved stone marker. Something told me not to linger near that rock. The runes or inscriptions looked more visible in the lower light, as though the shadows highlighted their shapes. The carved lines formed twisting patterns that made my eyes ache. The air there was unusually still. I stayed the night in the same spot, building a large fire in case Ranger saw the light. I barely slept. A feeling of dread gnawed at me, an irrational fear that the marker somehow ate him. It was a crazy thought, but by dawn, I felt half crazy anyway. The next day, I resumed searching. The canyon had countless nooks, narrow passes, and cracks hidden behind thick clusters of shrubs. I scoured them, calling Ranger's name until my throat was raw. I stumbled across an open clearing I was sure didn't exist on my original map. The topography had looked different. Maybe I was turned around. My watch said 6:40 a.m., but the sun was already high. I checked my compass for direction. The needle spun in slow circles, never settling. By that point, I was soaked in sweat, exhausted, and on the verge of tears. Then I smelled something awful, metallic, thick, and nauseatingly sweet. I followed the scent, holding my breath, terrified of what I might find. My dog's body was pinned against a tree trunk about 6 feet up. He'd been disemboweled. The bark was slick with blood, his eyes were open, and it looked like his jaws had been forced into a grin, cheeks split wide. My entire world shattered. Ranger was my friend. My partner, my only anchor. I couldn't process it. I don't know how long I stood there just staring at the glistening tangle of intestines that swayed slightly in the breeze. The blood was still dripping, meaning it was fresh. Meaning I might have interrupted whoever or whatever did this. When I finally pulled Ranger down from the tree, my arms shaking, I heard someone approach. The footsteps were so calm, so casual. Lucian's voice spoke behind me. "I'm sorry for your loss, James. Truly." I spun around, hatchet in hand, tears blurring my vision. Lucian stood with his hands folded in front of him, expression somber. "I didn't do this," he murmured. "But I see you blame me." "Why?" I choked out. "Why are you here?" He glanced at Ranger's body as though pitying me. "James, you and I both know you came out here to lose the things tying you down, didn't you? I'm just here to make that easier." I lost it. I screamed and charged him. He stepped aside effortlessly, and I stumbled into a cluster of rocks, scraping my elbows. When I turned, he was gone. No sign, no rustling. It was like he melted into thin air. I collapsed beside Ranger, sobbing. I tried to bury him. The ground was rocky, so I had to gather stones to cover his mutilated form. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The edges of my vision started going dark. Night fell faster than it should. I lit a fire and threw in all the wood I had left until the flames were roaring. I held the hatchet in my lap, staring into the shadows, waiting for Lucian or someone else to appear. No one did. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, head slumped on my knees. When I woke, my watch read 9:12 p.m., but the sky was pale, like sunrise. I flicked on my flashlight out of reflex and it glowed weakly, barely illuminating anything before dying. At the same time, my watch started ticking backward. I literally heard the small gears reversing, and the second hand jerking in the wrong direction. I gathered my gear, ignoring the exhaustion in my body, ignoring the dryness in my mouth. I needed to leave Echo Canyon, get back to the truck. Everything about the place was poison. I had to fight the sense that the mountains themselves were warping around me. The map made no sense. Trails that should have led back to the main valley ended at sheer drops or looped around in bizarre circles. I'd walk for an hour only to find myself returning to my previous campsite. My footprints overlapped, even though I tried changing direction. Every so often I caught glimpses of Lucian standing far off in the distance or perched on a rock watching me. I shouted, swore, tried to chase him, but he vanished if I ever got too close. On the third day of wandering, assuming it was a day, my food had started to spoil unnaturally fast. Packages of jerky were green with rot. My water bladder had algae in it, though I'd purified it properly. My backpack straps turned brittle and snapped. I had to lug it over my shoulder. Every time I tried to create a new campsite, the fire would sputter in bizarre colors: purple, green, pink, then extinguish itself. The only place I could keep a fire going was near the stone marker, and I despised that marker. It gave off a silent pulse that made my teeth ache. I questioned my sanity. I started finding pages of a journal I didn't remember writing. They littered the ground around the places I'd tried to camp. The handwriting was mine, but the text was foreign. It talked about making a deal, about letting go of everything. Another page read, "You've already given up. You agreed. Don't fight it." Some words were scratched out in thick black lines I couldn't replicate with my normal pen. At times, I found these pages pinned to trees with my own knife. I grew delirious. Water was scarce. When I tried to boil creek water, it boiled black, leaving behind sludge. I tried sipping the unboiled water, desperate. It tasted rancid, like blood and ashes. One night, I swear I slept for only a few hours, but when I woke, the stubble on my face had grown a full inch, like I'd been out for at least a week. My clothes felt stiff and smelled rancid. My throat burned from thirst. I walked aimlessly, hearing voices that whispered from behind rocks. They repeated my name, James. James, come home. Sometimes I heard my own voice calling me. My mind was fracturing. On a day when the sky burned a shade too orange, I discovered a new clearing. Smooth ground, ringed by twisted pines. A perfect place to rest, if not for the chest-high totem in the center. It was a column of stacked stones, carved in swirling patterns like the marker. Ranger's collar hung from a protruding rock like a trophy. I snatched it, hugging it to my chest. Something about that totem felt alive. The air around it was disturbingly warm. I heard footsteps behind me and whirled to see someone approaching from the tree line. It was Ranger, or something wearing his shape. He was intact, eyes bright, tail wagging. But there was a mismatch in how he moved. Joints bending oddly, head jerking every few steps. I almost ran to him, tears of joy flooding my eyes. Then I realized his pupils were white, with no iris, no normal focus. I called his name anyway. He tilted his head, made a clicking sound from deep in his throat. I froze. His tongue lolled out, impossibly long, almost black, dripping saliva. He still had the same outward markings as my dog. When I inched backward, the thing that looked like Ranger gave a low, distorted growl, deeper than any dog's growl should be. Lucian's voice sounded close by. "You can have him back if you want. Let go of your grief. Let go of your guilt." I spun, searching, but only the twisted pines were behind me. The imitation dog's lips peeled back in a mockery of a smile. Then it lunged. I raised my hatchet in reflex. The dog slammed into me, its jaws scraping my shoulder. Drool sizzling on my skin like acid. A surge of adrenaline fueled me, and I swung the hatchet blindly. The blade struck its neck, but the angle was wrong. The dog creature howled, staggering sideways. Instead of blood, I saw a stringy, viscous fluid that shimmered in rainbow hues. Its eyes never left me, that blank, milky gaze swallowing me whole. It jumped again, teeth aimed for my throat. I braced my forearm to block it, crying out as those teeth sank in. My forearm flared with pain, hot pulses traveling up to my elbow. I felt the bone give slightly. With my free hand, I hammered the hatchet into its skull. Once, twice, until it collapsed. I was screaming, tears mingling with sweat and raw panic. The creature twitched, tried to stand again, so I slammed the hatchet into its spine. Finally, it stopped moving. The world was spinning. My arm had deep punctures. Blood dripped from my fingertips, mixing with the rainbow fluid that pooled from the dog's body. My stomach rebelled, and I vomited. I couldn't accept that I'd just killed something shaped like Ranger. I sobbed there in the clearing until my head pounded from the tension. I don't remember returning to the stone marker, but that's where I ended up, leaning against it in utter exhaustion. The wound on my arm itched fiercely. Dark veins traced out from the bite, as though infection had spread instantly. If I pressed the area near the wounds, I felt pockets of fluid. I cursed, rummaging for bandages. My pack was in tatters, so I used my shirt, tearing it into strips. Night or day, I couldn't tell anymore, descended around me. The sky flickered like a faulty bulb, bright to dim, moment to moment. That was the first time I saw multiple versions of myself. I glimpsed, in the corner of my vision, another James. Unshaven, wild-eyed, crawling on all fours across the canyon floor. His fingertips left bloody prints on the rocks. He vanished when I looked directly at him. Another time, I saw a silhouette hanging from a tree in the distance, with the same build as me, wearing clothes that looked suspiciously like mine. There was no movement, just a limp figure swaying, but it wore my face. Or so I thought. My mind reeled, uncertain if it was hallucination or an actual physical manifestation of this place's sickness. Lucian appeared more frequently, sometimes in the corner of my eye, sometimes right in front of me. He would speak softly, offering me a deal. "Just give in to it," he'd say. "All that pain and guilt you carry, let it go." I screamed at him once, demanding what he truly wanted. He just smiled with that glacial calm. "I told you, James. You and I are kindred souls. We have a contract, one you signed with your intention the moment you set foot here." I hurled rocks at him, threatened him with my hatchet, but he never blinked. The moment I tried to strike, he disappeared. My rage and grief grew until I thought I'd lose my mind entirely. By then, I was surviving on scraps of jerky that weren't moldy, a little trail mix, and what little water I could find in pockets of the creek that hadn't turned foul. My skin felt feverish and tight. My watch hand spun around the face in random intervals, sometimes leaping forward, sometimes reversing. I glimpsed the date as August 8th one moment, then September 1st the next. I had no real sense of time passing. My beard grew in thick, patchy swaths, my lips cracked, my vision blurred around the edges. One evening, though evening was arbitrary by then, I found a wide clearing with short grass. A miracle, I thought, a potential route out. But as I walked, the grass crunched underfoot like shards of glass. My boots left footprints that glowed faintly. Then I saw him again. Lucian, standing at the far side beside a newly made fire ring. He beckoned me over, and for once I advanced with caution but not immediate violence. My hatchet felt heavy in my hand. "James," he said, voice kind, "sit. Warm yourself." I wanted to run, but the numbness inside me drove me forward, an odd resignation. I stood opposite him, the fire crackling in strange colors, my heart hammered. The heat was intense. "I only want to help," Lucian said. I see how you've lost everything you cared about. The pain, the regret, the crippling guilt. I can take that away. Let me show you." Before I could reply, something moved beyond the firelight. Ranger, or the monstrous version of him I'd killed. My dog, alive again, with no wounds, looking as healthy as the day I brought him home. I gasped, tears burning my eyes. He stepped forward, tail wagging, eyes normal. I reached for him but hesitated, remembering the monstrous doppelganger. Lucian's voice softened. "He's truly returned. Your dog. All you need to do is accept my help. Surrender your burdens." Ranger barked once, happily. I'd have done anything to believe it was really him, but I'd seen what had happened to the other imitation. I swallowed, shaking my head. "I can't." Lucian sighed, pressed his lips together, then stepped into the flames. They parted around him. I stared, stunned. He emerged on my side, placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was searing, but I couldn't pull away. I felt a wave of something, like a million hands reaching inside me, rummaging around for the memories that hurt most. I wrenched free, stumbling back, my shoulders smoking. I let out a scream as the flesh under my shirt was burned in the shape of his handprint. Ranger flickered in front of me, like a glitch in a faulty video, then vanished. In blind terror, I heaved my hatchet at Lucian's throat. He didn't move. The blade sliced across his neck, letting out a gush of thick, black tar that reeked of sulfur. He staggered, eyes widening in surprise, then reached up to cradle the wound. For the first time, he seemed truly shocked. I could hardly believe I'd struck him. He coughed, spattering black fluid onto the ground. I dropped to my knees, half from exhaustion, half from relief. For a moment, it felt like that single blow had shattered whatever hold he had on the canyon. Lucian stared at me. His lips curled into a grin, revealing sharp, inhuman teeth. "You are learning," he wheezed. "Good. You're beginning to remember who you are." I wanted to demand answers, but he fell backward into the fire and the flames swallowed him whole, turning red hot, then purple, then normal. When they cooled, nothing remained but ashes. I blacked out. When I came to, my left arm was numb from elbow to fingertips. Black veins spiderwebbed along my skin where the dog doppelganger had bitten me. I suspected that infection, otherworldly or otherwise, was rotting me from the inside. I needed to find a real exit. I forced my body to move, ignoring the pain, ignoring the dryness in my mouth. My meager supplies were basically gone. The last of my jerky had turned gray. My water bottle was filled with swirling black specks. The wind howled, and I realized it was the first time I'd heard wind in days. I stumbled through gullies, up scree slopes and around granite formations that seemed to shift every time I looked away. Sometimes I found myself walking on the edge of a sheer cliff that hadn't been there moments before. I turned corners, only to find illusions of my own corpse lying in a pool of congealed blood. Once, I saw Lucian's face in the bark of a tree, eyes blinking. I kept walking. A miracle appeared in the form of a road, a narrow dirt track carved along a ravine. I recognized it from my earlier scouting on maps. It led toward Lemuel Canyon Road, back near the small town of Spring Creek. I wept with relief. My watch read 3:07 a.m., but the sun was up. Or maybe it wasn't the sun at all. Everything felt surreal, but the road was solid. I followed it for what felt like hours until the ravine widened, revealing a battered wooden sign. Forest Service Road. I'd made it out. Somehow, my vision blurred. My arm was throbbing in the places where the black veins spread. Eventually, a battered old pickup truck rumbled into view. A bearded man in a ranger's uniform, ironically a real park ranger, not my dog, leaned out the window, eyes wide with concern. "Holy hell," he said. You look like you crawled out of a grave. You okay, son? I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't form words. I realized my tongue felt numb, too big for my mouth. I tried to speak anyway, managing only a rasping croak. He parked, jumped out, and reached for me. I recoiled, half expecting him to morph into Lucian, but he stayed normal. His badge read Carson. He coaxed me into the passenger seat of his truck. I stared at my reflection in the side mirror. My eyes looked sunken, my face scraggly with a filthy beard, but the reflection also did something else. It smiled. An overly wide grin that didn't match my real expression. Carson must have seen it because he hesitated, glancing between me and the mirror. I forced a laugh, but it came out twisted. My lips cracked and blood dribbled down my chin. He started the engine and asked, "How long have you been out here?" The question made me shake. I whispered, "Days, maybe weeks." He didn't question me further, just said he'd get me to a hospital. The ride out was a blur of rocking motion, dust clouds, and me drifting in and out of consciousness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucian's face or the pinned body of my beloved dog. I must have blacked out again because when I woke, we were on a paved road. A sign reading Spring Creek, 10 miles, flashed by. I gasped in relief. The ranger found me a phone. I tried to remember my sister's number. For a moment, I blanked, as if the piece of my brain containing her contact info had been stolen. Then it came flooding back, and I dialed with trembling fingers. She answered, but the call was garbled. I managed to say, "It's me, it's James," before the line dropped. Carson apologized for the spotty service, saying, "We'll be in town soon. You can call again from a landline." We reached a small medical center, little more than a clinic. I sat in the waiting area, shoulders hunched, while the ranger talked to a nurse behind the desk. My reflection in the glass door continued that faint, unnatural grin. I tried to avoid looking at it. My entire left arm felt cold, like I was losing circulation. They led me into an exam room. A tired doctor came in, introduced himself, started cleaning my wounds. He asked typical questions. "What happened? Were you attacked by an animal?" The words tasted like dust in my mouth, so I just nodded. I told him about the bite, omitting the supernatural details. He frowned at the black veins and took a swab. I sat there, letting him poke and prod me. At one point, I saw my reflection in a stainless steel cabinet, smiling while I had a neutral face. My stomach churned. Carson returned, kneeling next to my chair. He pressed a cup of water into my hands. "They're calling the local sheriff. They want to check out where you were, if you can show them on a map." I was so exhausted I just nodded. "Sure," I mumbled. "Echo Canyon, just be careful." He patted my shoulder. "You're lucky to be alive." I wanted to say it felt like the opposite, but I forced a weak nod. The doctor suggested I rest while they arranged transport to a bigger hospital in Elko. He left me in the room with a blanket, told me I was stable for now. The black veins worried him, but he believed it to be a severe infection, possibly from a necrotic bite. The nurse was in the process of hooking up an IV drip when the lights in the clinic flickered. A hush fell over the hallway. Outside, someone let out a startled cry. The nurse jumped, apologizing, said she'd be right back. I tried to stand, but found I couldn't move my left leg. Pins and needles shot through it as though it had fallen asleep entirely. I pulled the blanket aside to see the same black lines creeping up my thigh, merging with the ones from my arm. The numbness advanced. I heard a voice at the door. "James, I know you can hear me." I froze. It was Lucian. Soft, gentle, intimate. "You think you left me behind, but you never really did." I looked over my shoulder. The door was still closed, the hallway lights dimly visible. yet his voice slid under the crack, enveloping the room. I turned back to face the stainless steel cabinet where I'd seen my reflection grin. Now, Lucian's reflection stared back, eyes shimmering black. "This is only the beginning," he whispered, and the reflection smiled. Then the door burst open, and a nurse came in, flicking on the overhead lights. No sign of Lucian in the reflection. My chest hammered. She frowned, told me the doc would be back soon, that the sheriff's deputy was on the way. She gave me an injection to help with the infection, or so she said. My eyelids grew heavy, and I sank into an uneasy sleep. When I woke, they'd transferred me to a different facility in Elko. I recognized the antiseptic smell, the sharper white lights. My arm was bandaged up tight, my leg immobilized. A middle-aged nurse approached, her name tag reading Nancy. She smiled kindly. "You've been through hell. Are you feeling any better?" I blinked, noticing the clock on the wall read 7:45 a.m. A sliver of sunlight cut through the blinds. "Better than I was," I lied. My head felt stuffed with cotton. Nancy took my vitals, told me the local authorities were investigating the area. She also told me that my injuries were severe, but didn't appear to be life-threatening. Some kind of infection that they were still testing. She asked if I wanted to contact family. I nodded. She let me use a room phone to call my sister again. This time, it rang and rang without answer. I left a rambling message, voice trembling, telling her I was alive and in Elko, that I needed her help, that I'd pay her back for anything if she could just come get me. I spent the next few hours dozing in and out, the hospital hum droning. Carson, the ranger, must have left me a note or something, because a white envelope was on the bedside table. It contained a short message. "James, they asked me a lot of questions. I did my best not to mention everything. They'll probably want you to lead them back there. Carson." I felt a surge of panic. No, I wasn't going back. Let them go on their own. But I also realized I had no proof of anything that happened except my injuries. And the black infection was receding slightly, replaced by normal bruising, as if it was healing on its own terms. My mind reeled with everything that had happened. The dog's death, the illusions, the repeated sightings of myself. I almost convinced myself it was a fever dream. Maybe I had ingested poisonous water, hallucinated Lucian, hallucinated the dog's mutilation. But the memory of that gore, the image of Ranger pinned to a tree, was too vivid to dismiss. Later that same day, still August 2024 presumably, 2 men in plain clothes arrived, flashing badges. One was an Elko County Sheriff's deputy, the other a detective. They asked me routine questions, took my statement. I omitted anything that sounded impossible, focusing on an unknown assailant, the fact that my dog had been killed, that I got lost for days. "When did you last see the man you suspect killed your dog?" asked the detective, flipping through a notepad. "About 2 days before I got out," I said, deciding to keep it vague. "I can't be sure. My phone was dead, so I lost track of time." They frowned, probably suspecting I was holding back. The deputy asked if I'd come with them once I was discharged, lead a search party. I said I'd think about it. He asked for the name I had. I told him Lucian, describing what I could of his appearance. The detective closed his notepad, looking unconvinced. They left with a polite, "Thank you for your cooperation." That night, I had the worst nightmare. I was back in Echo Canyon, kneeling by Ranger's cairn of stones. I heard the slow scrape of metal on metal, turned to see Lucian standing behind me with a sickle. He said I owed him a debt, that I had indeed signed a contract by coming here. Then he lifted the sickle and brought it down, severing my left arm. I felt a rush of pain so real I was certain I'd lost the limb. I woke drenched in sweat, panting. Nearly ripping out the IV, my left arm was still there, though the veins around the bite wound were faintly black again. I had the sense something was moving under my skin. I pressed the call button for a nurse, but when Nancy arrived, she saw no sign of anything. She urged me to rest. I stared at the mirror in the bathroom for a long time after that, half expecting my reflection to grin back. The following morning, the doctor cleared me to be discharged, on the condition that I stay in town for at least a week for follow-up. I had no wallet, no phone, and only the tattered clothes they'd taken off me. The sheriff's deputy arranged for me to borrow some old sweats. They gave me a voucher for a local motel. As soon as I stepped outside into the daylight, I felt a weird trembling in the pit of my stomach, like I was crossing from one world to another. I found my way to the motel, let myself in, and locked the door behind me. The place was dingy. The bed sagged. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper. But it was infinitely better than Echo Canyon. I took the longest shower of my life. My arms stung. My scalp burned when I scrubbed the grime from my hair. I nearly sobbed in relief just to stand under real, warm water. The first night in the motel, I woke every few hours, swearing I heard Ranger barking outside, or Lucian's voice whispering at the window. I checked a half-dozen times, looking out at the empty parking lot. No sign of anyone, just the buzzing street lamp. 2 days passed. The local authorities never called. My sister never called back either. I grew restless, pacing the motel room like a caged animal. On the third day, I tried calling her again from the motel phone. It rang and rang. No answer. That evening, I flicked through the local news channels, paranoid I'd see something about a discovered body or a bizarre cult site in the mountains. Nothing. Sleep was elusive. When I did slip under, I dreamed of time skipping, of mountain peaks rearranging like puzzle pieces. Once, I dreamt of burying Ranger again, only to watch his remains dig themselves out of the earth. I must have been half awake because I heard the motel room's doorknob rattle. Bang, bang. I sat up, heart hammering. "James, open up." A voice like nails on glass. I shot out of bed, grabbed the lamp. The door was still locked, chain in place. The knob rattled again, more violently. "Let me in," the voice demanded. A softness underlying the hiss. My feet were cemented to the floor. Then a final shudder seemed to pass through the entire building. Silence followed. I peeked through the curtains. No one was outside. The parking lot was empty under the flickering lamp. After that, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I drank stale coffee from the motel pot and stared at my reflection in the TV screen. I tried to read the note from Carson again, looking for hidden meaning. Nothing. Morning eventually came. A week after arriving in Elko, I walked back to the clinic for a follow-up. The doc seemed surprised at how well the bite wound was healing. The black lines had faded to an almost bruise-like discoloration. He called it a remarkable recovery, though he still had no idea what caused the initial infection. He offered me a referral to a mental health counselor, guessing I'd suffered trauma out there. I took the card but never called. I weighed my options. The sheriff's deputy had never reached out. I was out of money soon. Returning to Echo Canyon was not a possibility, not if I valued my life. But staying in a cheap motel for a month with zero income was also impossible. My head pounded with the decision. Then, one afternoon, as I walked past a shop window, I saw my reflection grin. My face was neutral. My reflection was all teeth. That was the final straw. I left Elko 2 days later, hitching a ride west with a trucker. I never contacted the authorities again. I never told anyone about Lucian or about the horrors I'd witnessed in Echo Canyon. I decided that if the search party went out there, well, They'd discover whatever they were meant to discover. Maybe the canyon wouldn't even be there for them. Or it would appear normal. Maybe they'd vanish too. I had to stay away. I had to survive. I wish I could say it ended there, with me hitching rides until I found a new city. But I carry Echo Canyon with me in my bones. Sometimes I wake from a nightmare to find my watch spinning backward on my nightstand. Once in a while, I hear the faint bark of a dog outside my window. Or I see what looks like black tar dripping from the corners of the mirror. A nurse from the clinic wrote me an email. How she found my address, I don't know, saying that my blood samples showed irregularities but then were lost. She apologized. She hoped I was well. I've never responded. I burn through jobs, drifting from place to place, trying not to get too close to people. My nightmares still swirl with images of Ranger pinned to the tree. Sometimes I wake up feeling like something is missing from my mind. Memories of my childhood, my parents, my ex-fiancée. Their names slip away more each day. It's as though piece by piece my identity is being devoured, like an invisible contract is still ongoing. Lucian's words echo inside my skull. You and I are kindred souls. You've always been here. You can't go back. And in my darkest moments, when I pass by a reflective surface, I see him in my reflection. Or maybe I see me, with eyes that are just a shade too dark, smiling that too wide grin. The grin that says, I'm still here, and so are you. If you see a man in the wilderness offering help or a way to forget your troubles, don't even speak to him. If you feel time slipping or see your dog acting strangely, run and never look back. Maybe you can still escape if you're strong enough. If you're not, you'll find yourself pinned to that twisted place, in some corner of reality that devours your soul bit by bit, just like it did mine. So that's it. That's the truth as best as I can tell it. Whether you believe me or not, I had to write it all down. My name is James Holloway, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in August 2024, deep in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada. If you ever find your way to Echo Canyon, if it even still exists, don't stay. Leave before the canyon decides to keep you, and before he comes with his deals and illusions. Because I promise you, there are worse things than losing your life in those mountains. You could lose yourself forever.